believe his luck that he was still in the lead.
Watch the clock, it might be a world record, a huge battle on for the silver. Absolutely over the moon. Fantastic performance from him.
And in terms of introductions, my first job as moderator, even though our photographs are up in glorious Technicolor, I will introduce the panel, a very distinguished panel we've got today. I'll start furthest away. So at the far end of the panel, we have Kevin Mackay. So thanks for joining us today, Kevin. Kevin works with DF Concerts. Most of you will be familiar with DF Concerts. Really, really significant promoter and event organizer, not just in Glasgow, but across the country. You'll be familiar with events such as Transmit, summer sessions, major landmarks in the cultural calendar. What's interesting, I think, and we might hear some more about this from Kevin, is that Kevin has moved from an event production and touring background quite recently into being responsible for driving DF's sustainability initiatives across those products and those events. So I think that's something that would be interesting to hear about. So thanks for joining us, Kevin. Then as we move towards me, we're delighted to be joined today by Jennifer Ennis. Jennifer is currently working at the Scottish Event Campus, and I don't need to indicate how significant the SEC is in the, as an institution in the event sector, not just in Glasgow, but across the country. In fact, is one of the most significant international venues in the world. Jennifer's been working, interestingly, in this kind of sustainability role for nearly 12 years, specialising in building management commercial sectors. So a lot, therefore, I think, for Jennifer to add to this conversation. And more recently, Jennifer was responsible for developing the sustainability strategy at the SEC. So a lot to offer the conversation, I think. Then moving on, we have Libby Newell from the RNA, the Royal and Ancient. Also someone who is an experienced sustainability specialist, working in the sustainable golf team for the RNA, and indeed the head of the RNA's corporate sustainability team. So again, someone I think with a lot of experience and something really significant to add to the conversation. And that brings me on to the individual who just opened the session, Stuart Campbell. I first met Stuart in Liverpool, where Stuart was, had led on the delivery of an incredibly successful World Gymnastics Championships, and we were very lucky to have been able to recruit Stuart to come up to Glasgow to become Championships Director to lead on the delivery of our World Athletics Indoor Championships in 2024. So Stuart has had that role now for a number of years, and what's been clear is that the real significance that Stuart has placed on social impacts, on sustainability throughout his engagement in this event, and I think you can see that in the planning for today's event, but you can see that woven throughout the way in which I think we have approached this event, so I'd like to thank Stuart for that. Just touching on that then, before we open it up, we are, as was said, only days away now from delivering another World Championships in Glasgow and in Scotland. I think what is really interesting is the extent to which increasingly in events, and very, very clearly in this event, we are weaving social impacts into the very heart of events, into the very fabric of events. It's not additional, it's not peripheral, it's at the very centre of why cities like Glasgow deliver and bid for and host events. And within that, the issue around sustainability, if you think back 5, 10, 15 years, sustainability has become much more central than it certainly was. And as Stuart says, I've been delivering events for quite some time now. It's certainly much more central than it used to be. And I think we have to say that's really positive. This event, a really strong partnership between ourselves, UK Sport, Event Scotland, the Scottish Government, is another example of that. The partnership, I think, also includes World Athletics, and I think they have to be congratulated for adopting the Athletics for a Better World strategy, which, in the same way that Glasgow has adopted that approach to events, World Athletics have also woven that into the very heart. And that partnership approach, I think, is maybe where I want to start the conversation. Because it strikes me that in order to achieve anything significant, anything really meaningful, that can only really be done by a partnership approach. So maybe I wanted to start the discussion by asking each of the panelists, in terms of that sustainability agenda, what do you think the role of partnerships is or could be, and also possibly what some of the challenges might be around partnerships, possibly existing partnerships in that sustainability and environmental space. I'll maybe start at the end with you, Kevin, to kick us off on that one.
Sure. Just going to check that everyone can also hear me. Yeah, great. So thanks for that lovely introduction, Billy. In terms of partnerships, I think what everyone will probably say after me is that they are absolutely fundamental to fulfilling our sustainability goals. If we are not able to collaborate with the wider sustainability community across all the various stakeholders that we work with when we're producing our events, then there's no way that we can actually achieve the goals that we're setting out to achieve. So for me, at the moment, a big focus is mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions from the generators that we bring to our sites, from the fuel that we burn in our plant machinery when the event is up and running, and we can't meet that goal without introducing grid power at Glasgow Green for Transmit, for example. And that's not something that we can do on our own. We need a partnership with the City Council, with the district network operators, Scottish Power Energy Networks, to achieve that. So that just gives one example, but there's multiple ways that can be applied across our supply chain.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Maybe, I'll open it up if anyone wants to come in, or maybe Jennifer, if you want to.
Yes, thanks, Billy. Can everyone hear me? I'll move it across. Yeah, as Kev said, none of us work in isolation. Collaboration is a key part of driving sustainability in events. We work with event organisers very closely. We can try and nudge them in certain directions in terms of, selecting certain material to use, particularly trying to reduce the volume of waste generated from an event. But as a venue, we kind of give them the keys and let them crack on with organising their event. So working with event organisers is such a key element, and equally working with our suppliers, making sure that they're using material as sustainable as possible, and working with our partners, like our catering partners and our security partners, and our OVO, our naming rights partner for the hydro. We do a lot of collaboration with them. We all work together, and like Kev said, we don't work in isolation. It's all really, really critical to work in collaboration. One thing that we did a couple of years ago was develop sustainable event toolkits, which we issue out to all of our event organisers, and that gives them a list of recommendations and suggestions that they can do to make their event more sustainable. But equally, as I said, it's up to them to make those decisions, but that's one of the tools that we use to engage with our event organisers. And we have a waste protocol in place to outline the waste obligations that our event organisers should fulfil. And again, that's another way that we use, another tool that we use to engage with our event organisers and collaborate with them, and obviously work closely with them through the whole event planning stages to look to reduce waste particularly, and generally make their event more sustainable.
Thanks, Jennifer. Obviously the RNA will have a series of really quite significant strategic partnerships with sponsors and hosts, etc. So it'll be interesting to hear how you weave the sustainability agenda into those kind of relationships.
Yeah, I have to say, everyone can hear me okay, yeah? Brilliant. So we have partnerships, the same as yourselves, and in lots of different ways. It's key to, I would say, I was thinking of this beforehand, almost every single sustainability initiative we have in place is only working because we've got various different partnerships. So we have our patrons, our sponsors, and they do support us with some of our flagship initiatives. They do that financially, obviously, but they also do that by opening up a wider network to us and enabling us. MasterCard's one example, our flagship sustainability initiative, the Open Water Project, is about providing free refill stations at all of our championships to players, spectators, and the players bit's quite tricky because, you know, getting water stations on tees around our courses is not straightforward. But by working with MasterCard, we've been able to sort of get this to happen and get it off the ground. But it's not only that, they've also brought in the Priceless Planet Coalition. So we've turned what is just water refill stations into a project that's about biodiversity and air quality and supporting that through Priceless Planet Coalition, who have pledged to plant 100 million trees over the next few years. So there's all these different aspects to having a partnership that it grows a project into something more than what it was in the first place, which is amazing. But we also have, you guys mentioned contractors a few times, and we recently kind of threw the door open a little bit and said we've done as well, you know, we say this is what we'd like you to do, but we recently just said, guys, we want to be more sustainable. You're the experts in your field. If you have any ideas, let us know, come to us, we're open, we want to have a conversation. And it's been absolutely amazing. We have like, some of them are just small things, a change of materials. Some of them are huge projects trying to get more solar panels on our structures, which is actually a couple of different contractors working together because they know it's important to us. And they have these ideas, they're experts in the area. But what surprised me is they actually, I feel some of them, not all of them, needed us to ask, to say, please give us some more ideas to start that conversation and get it going. So it's been really cool doing that, actually getting lots of, like I say, some small scale change in materials, some really big projects, which is very exciting.
Thanks, Libby. Stuart, we mentioned that this event in itself is a major set of partnerships. So whether it's about this event or generally, given your experience of events, how significant are partnerships in this agenda, and how can they be leveraged to achieve sustainability goals?
Might need to just move closer to this mic. Yeah, thanks for that, Billy. I think it's, as Billy touched on, major events more recently through funding obligations from governments and institutions, there's more emphasis on sustainability and legacy rather than earlier. And sometimes you walk into something like this, all your funding partners want the greenest event possible, and it's very easy to say, yes, absolutely, I want the greenest event possible also, but then you enter some limitations and restrictions. So I think on the partnership level, all of our funding partners, as Billy outlined earlier, all have the same ambition. One thing that we're fortunate of with this event is that World Athletics actually have a very good sustainability framework called Athletics for a Better World that was referenced earlier. Sometimes, and I won't mention which, but sometimes with international federations, they can be a bit more reluctant to the word of sustainability. And that requires a bit more effort from someone like me in the organizing committee to bring them forward, change some of the things we do. One example is in a previous event that I did is we got rid of all business class for all the technical officials and VIPs from the International Federation. Now, that's a hard task. It's a hard task to have them buy into that, but we did have them buy into it. And the reason I mention business class is just as I'm sure some of you will know, but the carbon emissions compared to a solo sort of economy traveler are significantly different. And so sometimes you have a federation like that, and sometimes here where World Athletics is actually they put the pressure on me rather than the other way around. And I love that because it continues to drive me to push further. So I think from that partnership, this particular event is fantastic, and what we'll help do is shape how that looks for future World Athletics events. But we're not complacent, even with the International Federation, the fact they have a great framework, there are still limitations. I still have to fly people in from all over the world. There's no easy way to get around that to be more sustainable other than not have the event. But of course, we want to have these World Championships. And then if I just touch on briefly commercial partnerships, this is more and more important to us. typically for an organising committee, because you're publicly funded for the majority, you have big expectations in bringing commercial income in. And previously, and it's probably a pre-pandemic piece actually to major events, that was usually you have some big organizations jumping at the bit to be attached to these events. Post-pandemic, things are so different in their economies. But also we want commercial partnerships, as you touched on, that align with our morals and ambitions. And sometimes that means saying no. We haven't necessarily had to do it for this event, but again, on a previous event, I have had to. And saying no to significant income due to, sorry, I'm losing my place here. Say no to that income is a difficult thing when you have to balance public funding, but if it doesn't align morally, then you have to stand by your morals that you set out from the beginning, is what I'm trying to say in a nutshell.
I think
No,
the more
yeah.
people do that as well, the easier it is. So if we're all doing that, then it's more expected, people understand.
Yeah.
And what we've found as well, that increasingly our patrons or sponsors are asking things of us. And so our partnerships team and others are coming to me looking for information, making sure, and it's brilliant because I can say, yes, we've done all of that. This is great. Here you go. But they're going to keep pushing us and I love it. It's brilliant. So it's sort of a mutual relationship. And you'll have the same with acts. With your artists, is that right?
Not so much with artists, but I would say the same with commercial partnerships. It's a similar issue. But I think that issue also exists as a result of them, and this is, I assume, the same in most organisations, the manner in which partnerships teams are rewarded. If you work in a sales-based job within an organisation where you're trying to bring in clients and your own individual financial remuneration is attached to how big the deal that you get with the partner is, then if there's not another element of that matrix that includes the organisation's values, then that makes it that bit much more challenging for that individual within that team to make that choice, because then they're just doing it purely on a moral basis, not on the basis of what's actually best for them. And that's how most people work, unfortunately.
That's very true.
Just before we move on from partnerships, because there are a couple of other things I'd like to touch on in the kind of limited time we have. So maybe very briefly, and maybe we'll be a little bit controversial here. And we had a brief chat about that, and it touches on a little bit of the last few comments you were making there, Stuart. There is a challenge around partnerships. We've seen that with partnerships where there's a constituency who will be opposed to and will protest about partnerships that organisations will enter into, whether that's about banking organisations or fossil fuel organisations. So there's a degree of, in a sense, risk around partnerships. So how, as event organisers, how do you manage that process? How do you manage that process? And indeed, that might include managing existing relationships. Briefly, I don't know. I'll just open that up really for anyone who wants to pitch in.
Well, in terms of existing relationships, one of the kind of key issues in the festival industry that I'm sure many people will be aware of is the prevalence of disposable vapes, and we'll say disposable, and we'll caveat that heavily because we know that they're not really. So that's been an ongoing problem for the last couple of years, and it's very evident in our city centres, and for us running events that take place in quite close to urban spaces and in Glasgow's parks. Bellyhouston Park and Glasgow Green being the main ones for the large-scale outdoor events. There's that tension existed last summer because one of our sponsors was a company that did market these products. They weren't selling them or giving them away on our site. They had other products that they were giving away, but there's a tension there that exists between the environmental sustainability goals of the event and of the festival and a product that one of our partners was selling. Not as a result of that, the deal just happened to come to an end, but we're not working with that partner going into 2024. But it's just one of those things that I think will continue to, that those tensions will continue to exist over the next 5 or 6 years as we move into this space where it feels like there's an acceleration across all, not just within events, but across all sectors as we move towards 2030 and recognising the pace at which we now need to start moving to meet the global sustainability goals.
Thanks for that. Anyone else want to?
You mentioned earlier as well, Kevin, about the values, and I think if you're working, so for me, I try to make sure like anyone in our team and our partnerships team, the door's open, we can have conversations. I'm not about to throw my toys out the pram because they mention a company I don't like, but we can have these, if we've got strong values and we're working with patrons, sponsors, contractors who share our values, then we're all, as cheesy as it sounds, on the same journey together. So I think there's that, I guess, for me, it's having the open conversation and keeping those values central to everything that you do. Yeah, I think that's a key bit when you've got tricky situations going on.
I'm keen to move on unless Jennifer or Stuart, there's anything you particularly want to add.
I'm just going to make a small comment, Billy, and again, from an organising committee's point of view, is understanding your sphere of influence. So World Athletics as the international federation hold all the rights to this event. So if I want to choose something, we need to buy into a program. So there's a lot out with my sphere of influence or control that we have to accept, but what is within our control in terms of what the organising committee brings on, I think that's the important thing, and that's what we can control. And then it's, as you touched on, the vision and values. So going back to purpose, sometimes it's just a conversation about why, and a reminder, do we all align with this ambition and vision to be sustainable for all the reasons we know? And I think, for my team across the organising committee, that's very clear from day one in terms of what we go through. Everyone buys into this vision. So that's probably just my little comment, is more about sphere of influence.
Thanks for that. Well, with your permission, I'm going to move on. So whether it's an Open Championships, whether it's Transmit, whether it's COP26 at the SEC, or whether it's the World Athletics Indoor Championships or the Cycling World Championships recently held in Glasgow and across Scotland, those kinds of major events, and those are the major events that we are bidding for, we are ambitious about, we're trying to bring to Glasgow. Those kind of events, they have a massive infrastructure around them. They have significant supply chains, whether logistics, transport, all of that, transmits on a greenfield site or from a major venue, or as a nomadic event like the Open, where you're starting from scratch every time you do it. What I'm interested in exploring is how you build that sustainability approach, how you build in sustainable values with your supply chain, how you maybe build in circular economy values, how you integrate that, add value, how you generate momentum into those really complex structures, and also cost-critical structures, because we're all operating within a business model, of course we are. So I'm interested in exploring that for a while. I'm happy to pick someone to start unless someone's going to volunteer. I don't see any volunteers, so I'm going to pick on Jennifer, just to kind of kick us off on that one, really, maybe from an SEC perspective.
Yeah, we're actually quite fortunate at the SEC. We mentioned infrastructure, obviously with the dedicated train station, so that really helps support people to use green travel to get to the SEC. And I'm sure Libby and Kev can probably empathise that, visitor and attendee travel can be a significant portion of your carbon footprint. And there's only so much we can do as a venue or as an event organiser to encourage or incentivise your guests and your attendees to use green travel. But ultimately, people have their own free choice to make a decision as they wish. You can put on, like COP26 obviously had a fleet of electric buses from town, and there's a big incentive for attendees to visit the venue, using green travel. Like I said, we're quite fortunate in that respect. And the other benefit we have is obviously we're a static venue. We don't travel to multiple events, so I know Libby and Kev will probably have different challenges in terms of, like you said, having an event on a green space and trying to get all your patrons to, come to the venue using green travel. So yeah, I guess that's we're quite fortunate in that respect.
Billy, you mentioned bringing contractors or bringing partners along on that journey with us, and that's definitely something that has been a focus of my role for the last couple of years. Two of the contractors that we'd worked with most closely in sustainability at festivals, as one might imagine, is our waste management contractor and our energy supplier. Our waste management contractor, they came in as a new contractor at the same time that I started in 2022. So it was a really great opportunity to build that relationship together and come up with initiatives that were going to work, or that we felt that were going to work with the audiences at our events. The other thing is that audiences change depending on the artist that's performing, where the event's taking place, what type of event it is, how drunk people are going to be getting. All these different variables play into it, particularly with regards to waste management, as anybody who's actually been to Transmit will be able to attest. It's quite challenging. But so for us, it was about looking at that, what had happened in previous years, and going, well, the waste had been segregated quite well by the contractor and by the previous incumbent contractor. But when we brought these new guys in, part of the reason we did that was that we'd looked at the processes that they had in place for managing the waste once it left the site, and they had access to a facility which would allow them to compost a lot more of the materials that we were selling across the bars and from the food traders. And as a result of that, we worked with them in 2022 and moved into improving those processes in 2023. I could go on in detail about this, but I'll just move past all the nitty-gritty details of waste management. But the positive outcome was that by the time we got to working on Connect at the end of last summer, we either recycled or composted more than 80% of the waste that we dealt with on that site, which is a massive achievement for us, having gone from less than 50% of the waste actually getting processed correctly. And the reason that we have that knowledge of what actually happened with the waste, and the reason that we were actually able to achieve that goal, is by working hand in hand with the contractor in the earliest possible stage of the planning process. The problem with that is that it's a lot of time for the contractor to put in to work with you in particular when they're working across multiple other events to achieve these goals. So building good, strong, solid personal relationships with your contractors in the first instance is absolutely key to achieving that.
I definitely want to ask you more questions about that afterwards, because that's an incredible result to have got that well done, to have done that with your waste management. We all know waste is a really tricky one, so that's really cool.
Yeah, the challenge for us though is that it works. The solutions that we've come up with work for us, but we're not certain that they're scalable. So that's the issue. Yeah.
You mentioned the sort of greenfield site, and obviously we host our championships on golf courses. Most of our championship courses are on or next to protected sites, so triple SIs and things. So we have environmental management plans in place for all of our championship venues. And we have an ecologist, Bob, who's amazing, and he just keeps the staging team right. So where any tents are, where people are going to walk through, where they're not allowed to go, that's all kind of sorted with Bob. But that's kind of the mapping side of things. For actually getting the logistics of the infrastructure, if you take players and spectator travel out of our equation, is haulage. Haulage is one of our biggest carbon emission areas. So we're really lucky. We have great relationships with our contractors. Who, as I was saying before, working with the partnership side of things, it's really saying this is important to us. We want to know what you're doing as well. And in asking them that question the other year, we found that one of our contractors, you know, they were working with the Grand National, which is just up the road from Liverpool last year, down the road, near. And so that contractor kind of sorted things out. So they were taking things straight from the Grand National to the Open as soon as it finished, so they didn't need to go back down to their site. We've got AIG Women's Open in St Andrews this year. Just after it will be the Dunhill Links Championship. So again, our contractors are working together when they can, to even structures are being shared to reduce the infrastructure traffic that we have. And that's all about having the conversations and opening up and saying, this is important to us, what can you do, what can we, making those links with everyone. It's amazing.
Before I come to you, Stuart, and this is a question to all of you, in terms of those conversations with contractors, with the organisations in your supply chain, the appetite is there, the shared values are there, there's no, you're not having to kind of push, or are you?
Vast majority it's there for me. Yeah, definitely. From large and small as well, which is different from, I've been doing this a while, it's different from how it was even 5 years ago. The door is open, you just need to knock, basically,
Attitudes have definitely shifted the last few years, like you said.
I suppose for me, being relatively speaking new into working in sustainability, it's I'd say that the ambition is certainly there, but sometimes the resource to achieve the goals is not always available, simply because costs are high. As far as I'm aware, costs are up across the board more than 50% above pre-pandemic levels in the events industry. So that in and of itself means that if you're an event organizer and you're asking more of your contractors at the same time that they're putting their prices up, it's obvious where that leads. So I definitely get the sense that when I'm speaking to the people that lead the businesses that we work with, that they get it and that they're on board in a moral sense, but when it comes down to the crunch, sometimes they need a little bit of a push.
That's where you can kind of flip that on its head. Not all the time, but sometimes it's actually a cost-saving opportunity. With the example of our contractor not going back down to London with their stuff and coming back, they saved all that fuel. We don't pay for that. That's
when I say
all
a
on
push,
them.
it's more about not necessarily a push. It's more like giving a good incentive for making the change. Yeah.
I want to bring you in, Stuart, on this one. That issue around supply chain, circular economy, infrastructure, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. There's quite a lot I wanted to come back on, and I was scribbling away, making all sorts of notes, but I won't be able to come back on everything there. I think in terms of costs, I mean, probably no surprise to anyone, post-pandemic and for a number of other circumstances, costs for events, in particular temporary infrastructure, is absolutely through the roof, what it used to be. And we're seeing that across the board with major events, certainly in the UK. I think what I always try and the process for me is that sometimes when you talk about what is the most sustainable way to do things, if people don't know or they assume it's going to cost higher, certainly in the events I do, and I'm a little bit envious of the long-term piece of work that you have across the panel. For me, you have a fixed term time to create something and then move on to the next thing. So I think it's understanding and trying to find the time to search what is the most sustainable way to do something, because quite often, as you touched on, actually the most sustainable way can also be the most financially sustainable method of doing it, but it often requires time, and time is a luxury we don't always have in these one-off events. In terms of circular economy, Billy, is that what you asked me? In terms of circular economy, I think the appetite, as is touched on, when you speak to suppliers, they're more engaged about sustainability now. Sometimes you still have the odd few that it's quite difficult to get them focused on that ambition. But I'd say overall, the suppliers want to be sustainable. You mentioned resourcing, that's quite a difficult thing too. And again, going to the cost of what that product is, a temporary power unit, temporary green power unit compared to a less greener version, you know, the cost is significantly different. And sadly, with public funded models, that can be really challenging to make those decisions. But I think the supply chain are there and they want to do it. There's only so much we can do from a one-off event in the time frame we have. But I guess the important thing for us to do is things like this, engaging with yourselves across different, we're all in the event industry, but different areas, and continue to talk and engage and transfer of knowledge. I think that's so important. In 21 and 22, I used to meet with Commonwealth Games, Women's Euros, Rugby League World Cup. I host every single month. UCI Cycling, Trudy and I used to meet regularly and just talk about what we can do. One of the events I really loved is Rachel Delay, who was leading on the World Coastal Rowing Championships. And just all of the things they were doing with seaweed and creating power. It was fascinating. I couldn't do any of that with my event, but I was fascinated by it. And I think we have to continue that conversation. Did that answer your question?
No, well, it did. I'm keen to ensure that we leave a bit of time for questions from the floor, but I do want to ask one other question for the panel. And it is asking you to stick your neck out a little bit. We've had a really good conversation, but in terms of what happens next, from your point of view in your slightly different roles with your slightly different sets of responsibilities, I think what's interesting about the panel is we've got representation from promoters and event organisers, representation from significant venues, representation from event owners, and representation from an event sector delivering an event. So I'd like to ask each of you, in a sense, what you think are the real priorities now in terms of this agenda, the sustainability agenda. What are the key things that we have to focus on now, or you have to focus on within your areas? I'll maybe start with you, Stuart, if you're okay.
Yeah, so I think in terms of myself and the organising committee, so as I touched on earlier, funding partners are keen to drive this forward. And that's fantastic, but a lot of my job is actually reminding funding partners and helping them push and keep it at the top of the narrative. And one of the great things in this city is Glasgow City Council's ambitions to 2030 and their climate plan. But for me, it's to keep talking about this, and host sessions like this have the leader of the council be fully aware of our social impact programme and supportive. So I think that's an important thing for me in terms of the funding partners. And in terms of the International Federation, as I touched on, they take sustainability and social impact very seriously, and that's fantastic. What we're doing with this event is aspiring to be the most sustainable World Athletics event ever, and that's quite a big task actually. But by doing that is helping inform the International Federation some of the things that work well, some of the things that are challenging to us. But it's also highlighting, we're in Western Europe, and it's very different when that event goes to, Nanjing will be next year in China, and in terms of what they do for sustainability, it might be very different and take a different approach. And it might be fantastic, but part of the work we do is to help inform partners, supply chains, and the International Federation about what is achievable and what requires more support or a policy change. And I think that's important. I think just to touch on priorities in general, from these sort of events, it is really that temporary infrastructure for us. We have purpose-built venues, which are fantastic, but it's all of the excess that we need to do. It costs a lot of money, and it is not always the most sustainable way to do it. And again, in Scotland, we're in a luxurious position. We have great suppliers here, but when you take that to a different part of the world, it may not be. So I think it is to keep informing, it is to use the sport, the athletes, everything to raise awareness at every single level, from volunteers to spectators. I'm grateful to have two of our Green Champion volunteers in the audience today. And every single level, from media, from broadcast, to keep having this at the top of the agenda and reminding them how important it is. I talk about a very granular level, and you reminded me of Hoylake and where the Open was last year, that I attended that actually. And one of the things I love there is talking about pricing on menus. And so spectator catering, I was very surprised to see how affordable that was. But the sustainability angle for me is things like that, when you're able to make healthy products, local produce, affordable. And also the other element I really like is when we put carbon footprint measurements on those menu items, because at a very granular level, at a very granular level, it starts that conversation. And so I also did that for gymnastics, because when someone goes and they say a beef burger is this, you know, and a chicken, and people don't realize the significant difference. It might not change the product they choose at that time, but it will start a conversation. And I love that. And that's at a very low level. If that's all we achieve about sustainability and events, it's really fantastic. So
You've
I'll
made
stop
my
there.
day.
Who wants to come in next?
Can I-
Priorities.
So I've got kind of two, I kept thinking of more priorities as you're chatting. I'm going to go with two. So one of them for us is, a lot of people obviously talk about their net zero targets at the moment through like sporting organisations, government, businesses, corporate, everyone. We have made a decision as an organisation to make a plan and then a commitment, rather than a commitment to net zero by a certain time and figure out how to do it later. And I think that's incredibly important to us, because it means that when we stand up there and say, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to get to, it's credible. It's really, everyone's on board with it. I think there's a bit of fatigue sometimes when you say, oh, we're going to be net zero by such and such. We'll figure out how to do that in a minute. We need to bring our patrons, our contractors, our spectators, our players, our internal staff along on this journey with us. And I know I'm going to get the buy-in to do that, because we're going to have this really robust plan that's going to say this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be beautiful. So I can talk about that next time, I'm sure. The other priorities, that's sort of like looking at our climate ambition, which I think is something really good to allow everyone to have a joint goal. And we're really lucky that we do our championships every year. And obviously I've worked in that area before, and it is different when you don't get that opportunity, but so we can bring everyone on that goal with us will be brilliant. The other thing you kind of mentioned earlier, just really briefly, that, you know, the most sustainable way to have one of these major sporting events is not to have it, or not have spectators. And I think it's obviously something that we all of the sustainable sport conferences, it's always mentioned. Why do we do it at all? One thing I really want to do is to pull out and understand more the social value of our championships through the volunteer programs, the local skills training and workforce, and we do so much work with local schools, girls in tech and things, and really interested in pulling that out more and understanding the social value. And we've naturally, as we tend to in these events, talked about the environmental sustainability side just now. I know your next sessions are more on the social side, which is wonderful, but that's something that I really want to get under this kind of as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, because events bring such a wide benefit to people and communities. It's really important to remember that. I think for us, we released our sustainability strategy a couple of years ago. A couple of key priorities on that is our net zero ambitions. We released our roadmap earlier in the year, so that's going to be a key focus for us for the next couple of years, for the next few years. So we want to reduce, we come off gas as a heating source, and put in renewable sources of energy into the campus. So that's a key element of our strategy. Another key element of our strategy is waste in general, and I know everyone on the panel is more than aware of how much waste is generated by events. And a key measure we took the last couple of years is bringing in reusable cups into hydro, and we're looking to kind of further roll that out as a reusable, kind of just replacing single use as much as possible. Because even it seems like a small measure, just bringing in reusable cups, but it's a lot of thought went into that process, because you're totally changing the logistical operation of your bar staff and storage and everything else. And a lot of the conversation in the last few years has been like, what's the most sustainable or the best disposable material to use, like compostable or various different plastics and different grading of plastics. But really what we want to do is move away from disposable completely and just focus on reusable, because that's obviously reducing waste significantly. Because when we brought that in a couple of years ago, I noticed straight away the waste volumes that we were producing drastically reduced. And I really want to see that trend continuing, that our waste figures just keep on going down the right direction. So that's another really key priority for us for the next foreseeable future.
It's really interesting that conversation about compostable versus reusable. It's a live conversation, really, isn't it? What about you?
We can talk about that off table. Yeah, thanks very much, guys, for all your wonderful comments, by the way, before we finish. But in terms of our own priorities, long term, we currently don't have a 2030 roadmap written and out there in the public realm for people to read and understand and to share with potential partners. And that for me is a big priority, is having that document out there, and it's something that we are currently working on. So I can't go into too much detail about that just now, but in terms of initiatives that we have for this year, reusable cups will be getting trialled at an outdoor show in Stirling. So we've got Stirling Summer Sessions happening. There's different challenges to meet when it comes to using them at an outdoor show. So we're working closely with a potential partner to make that happen. I mentioned at the start, grid power access is the best way to reduce the amount of fuel that you need to burn on a site. We know that there's music festivals that have already done it. Oya Festival in Oslo have been using grid power for 98% of their operations for the last 10 years. And they started implementing that about 15 or 20 years ago. Electric Picnic have just announced that they'll be moving to grid power for the main stage this summer. They're at least going to explore the feasibility of it. For us, if we were able to move to 100% grid power at Bellhouston Park, Glasgow Green, and any other site that we're working on, at Glasgow Green, for example, it would mean transporting 50 or 60 fewer generators to the site and burning about, we wouldn't need to burn 70, 80, 90,000 litres of fuel. And if that was something that was able to be replicated across the rest of the industry, as much as the fuel that we burn on our sites is only actually a small proportion of our overall carbon footprint, if you multiply that across all the outdoor events that are taking place in urban centres across the UK, you're talking about potentially millions of litres of fuel. So that would be a good one for us to get in the next few years.
Okay, well, look, thanks for sharing your priorities, and thank you very much for all of your comments. We've got maybe 5-10 minutes left. So I think we'll open it up for any questions from the floor, either about what we've discussed or anything else on this topic.
We have got some online, but if anybody wants to throw a question.
Hi, I'm Matt, also from the Scottish Event Campus, and I should say I'm not a plant. I hadn't actually realised Jennifer was going to be here today, so really interesting to hear of all your comments. Obviously, we've got an understanding about what your priorities are, but I was just keen to know about any key wins or kind of highlights that you'd like to shout about, perhaps from events that you've worked on in the past or perhaps upcoming for Glasgow. So just any key wins or highlights.
I'll be quite brief because I'm sure there'll be some broader examples across the panel. I think one of the wins for us in this event is working with Glasgow Life and Glasgow City Council. When we built the USP I mentioned in the opening, looking back 10 years since Commonwealth Games, et cetera, is we were lucky in challenging times that Glasgow Life and Glasgow City Council supported the extension of the legacy of the Emirates Arena, for example. You know, that was opened 2012, I think that was, Billy. And, you know, it's a hugely successful facility for the city. And in fact, a colleague from World Athletics told me it's probably in the top 5 in the world for its utilization of an indoor athletics facility. I mean, that's hugely significant for a city like Glasgow. And it just the legacy of events and athletes that have come through. I mean, we have a number of athletes competing in a little over a week until the championships begin, who attended events in that arena earlier on and have seen the likes of Ailey Doyle come through, who's our ambassador. She'll be here shortly, actually. you know, there's huge testament to that. So extending the legacy of that facility, so the city has invested in a lighting upgrade, so more sustainable lighting and energy use in that facility. That's not because of the event, it was already taking place, but we've helped to expedite that a little bit in terms of the event coming, but also the investment in a new track in that facility where we'll see new stars coming through. Potentially they'll be attending as spectators in a little over a week. And just really, and the reason I mention that is because it's such a well-used facility, that this is testament to Glasgow and Scotland's commitment to expanding on the legacy of athletics throughout, but also the community users who use that facility very regularly. It's slightly a stretch from sustainability. It's more in the legacy element, but it's a huge win, I think, for us.
I've got one that I'll try and do quite quickly. That it's a lovely story that I really enjoy. So a couple of years ago, we started a community reuse program from the Open, where at the end, we start our build in April, the events in July. The takedown's quite a bit quicker. We've got quite a bit of, things that it becomes waste, quite simply, is put into bins, and we wanted to find a way to reduce that to it's got value, get it reused. So we worked in St Andrews and in Liverpool last year with a couple of local groups to do this community reuse program. We would have a tent, one of the last ones to go down, that our contractors would put items in. It's like, I think St Andrews, it was 74 kilograms of screws and nails, loads of wood. And there's community gardens in St Andrews that are now, they're benches, they're planters, all made from wood that we had from the Open, which simply would have been recycled, but still basically skipped. And they make bird boxes. I've got one in my garden, actually, out of the wood at community events and things like that. There's some of our branding, which we're not able to reuse, is used to line the planters, used for pond lining, used in the local botanic gardens and things like that. So we've done that the last couple of years. It's been brilliant. But one of the things I love is really, and we obviously don't want that waste there in the first place, even though it's got value for the community, which is wonderful. After St Andrews, we had a lot of wood, an awful lot of wood. It was used, that's great. Our contractors realised, oh wow, that's got a value. And they're reusing it themselves now in a different way, which is perfect. But we still have lots of local communities, and we'll be doing the same again in Troon this year, which is brilliant. But I love that one, because you get to see the impact it has on all the schools and youth groups that are using the items. It's really cool.
That is a lovely little kind of virtuous circle, isn't it, with the contractors coming to realise, hang on.
Yeah.
We can reuse this ourselves. Really, really interesting. Any other kind of responses to the question?
For me, it's probably not the most exciting answer, but we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years of making our buildings more efficient, and we've done a lot of work around our energy management. We've got an energy working group, we've got an energy management plan, and for me personally, seeing the benefit of that, obviously seeing our energy use come down, because that's obviously a big factor of our big element of our carbon footprint for the buildings. But like I said, it's probably not the most exciting one, but it's the one that probably takes the longest time for me in terms of analysing data and implementing projects and driving forward improvements constantly. So we've seen some really big wins in the last couple of years on that front, which has been a really good win for us and me personally as well. It's been good to see that benefit come through.
I think that is really exciting.
Yeah, okay. Well, it is
exciting for sustainability professionals.
That's exactly it, yeah.
We were all geeking out before we came on stage earlier talking about things. I think we've had a number of wins. I mean, I mentioned the recycling and composting rates at Connect, which was brilliant. And going into 2024, we're going to be working with Strathclyde University. Their electrical engineering department is going to help us develop a toolkit for monitoring the energy consumption across our festival sites. Because we're working with our contractors to try and do that, but like we said, resource-wise, and also just having knowledge and understanding of the standard of measurement that's required to the high-level detail that we'd need to actually start making significant changes in the energy mix on site. these guys at Strathclyde have the knowledge and expertise to help us do that, so I'm really excited to be working with them this year.
Thanks. Any other questions from the floor? Or no, the next session is moderated by someone else.
I think it was Stuart that mentioned the media. I was a volunteer at UCI during last summer. I found it very frustrating that the opposition political parties and the media were very negative about the championships leading up to when they were happening. It was quite frustrating as a volunteer to hear just, oh, the roads are going to be closed, this is going to happen, or everybody's going to be put out. I just wondered, the report for the UCI came out last week, it was very positive. So how do, I presume it's Stuart and probably yourself, Billy, that got to deal with this negativity, how do you get around that?
That's, wow, that's a big question. I think probably everyone in the event sector shares a degree of frustration when events around which people get genuinely excited, whether it's volunteers, whether it's athletes, spectators, people working on the event, get really excited, and any negative publicity, is a real disappointment. I think, however, we are really lucky to live in a country where, people are allowed to express all sorts of different views, and we need to be clear that, especially in a financial landscape like the one we currently operate in, getting the investment that is required to deliver big events means making an argument that money should be spent on an event as opposed to something else. So we do need to be really clear about the benefits, and we need to be clear that someone will have a different view about priorities, and I think that's absolutely legitimate. I'm very clear for having, as a result of having worked on events in this city for quite some time, that events deliver a whole series of benefits. Take the cycling, for instance. I was in Edinburgh for the launch of the socioeconomic study, and the figures are astonishing. So just economic benefit, £205 million for Scotland, but 127 million for Glasgow. Glasgow invested £16 million in that event. £16 million is a huge amount of money, but the return on that investment in a few years was 127 million. So effectively, you're getting a kind of, for every pound you spend, you're getting £8 or £9 back invested in the city economy. 5,000 jobs created. That's astonishing. That's jobs, that's livelihoods, that's a real tangible benefit. But actually, that's only part of it. And if you think about cycling, and actually in terms of this agenda, sustainability, the work that has been woven around that in terms of active travel, I did a little piece of work with an Afghan women's empowerment group out in the north of the city. So there's women who, back in Afghanistan, weren't allowed to go on a bike, and now felt absolutely liberated. And that was a little piece of work that would only have happened, the funding for that would only have happened because of that event. So the event itself is not just about the economic benefit. The culture of participation, the engagement, the excitement, the activation that those events can generate, that's also astonishing. And the cycling is a really good example of that. This event, slightly smaller in scale, is another example of how you can leverage an event, not just to deliver economic benefit, but to get people excited, to kind of maintain that momentum in terms of a culture of participation. There's a whole series of social impact projects and content and inventory being delivered by Stuart and his team, some of whom are here today, which is really, really astonishing. Junior park run, all sorts of things happening across the city. And it's that legacy. I'll just finish. I remember, and people still debate, did the Commonwealth Games have an impact in the city or didn't it? There's one stat which I always remember. We did some work around sports clubs in the city and them being ready for an upsurge in interest from young people after the Commonwealth Games. We were anticipating that. And we charted that progress from 5 years before the Games to 5 years after. The number of young people in the city who joined sports clubs went up by 384%. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Now, don't tell me there's no benefit from hosting events in the city, because that happened in the city. So I would like if the press and everyone kind of picked up those stories to a greater extent. We can only control so much. I think if we keep remaining positive, if we keep being clear about the evaluations and the evidence, then eventually we will win those arguments. So, sorry, that was a very long-winded response to your question, but there you go. Once I start, I can't stop.
Can I just add a little snippet to that? And very, very brief. It's how you communicate those stories, because that's the important thing, and it's something that in all events I've been involved in, you tend to have that negative sort of public reaction, at least initially. Usually when the event begins, everyone buys into how amazing this is. But it's important that everything we talk about now is actually how we capture it. You mentioned about social value evaluation earlier. That's a very tricky one to evaluate. We've become very good at economic evaluations, but it's quite tricky to do the social value. We're actually working with an organisation at the moment to build this framework to make sure that we can do that proper assessment, but then how we communicate that to the people of Glasgow and wider in a way that's understandable and they can really feel that impact. I think that's something that Cycling have done very well actually with that recent publication, but something that we're constantly trying to improve is make sure we get those stories clear.
Any further questions? Oh, I think that's probably our time up. So, I'd like to thank the panel for their contributions today. Very, very interesting. So if we can just thank them in the usual traditional manner.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody to the session. I think we'll find it some really interesting discussion hopefully we'll have in the next 50 minutes or so, and as we said, a chance to ask some questions as we go on. Before we start, I thought it'd be useful for me to introduce our panel to you, and I'll start from my immediate right and move on. My immediate right, Laura Easton. Laura's a major events workforce manager. She's got over 12 years' experience in international sports events throughout the United Kingdom. She's been responsible for the recruitment, development, and mobilising of paid staff, volunteers and contractors at 2 Commonwealth Games, the UEFA Champions League final and multiple sporting world championships. Her team have won several awards for the social impact and legacy of volunteer programmes for the host city volunteers and Homeless World Cup events. Laura. Moving on to the next right is Emily Nicholl. Emily's an associate with Vincent Masons, who are sponsors of World Athletics. She's an associate in the restructuring team there. She's experienced in all aspects of restructuring and insolvency, particularly in relation to formal insolvency processes. She balances the demands of the legal world with those of being an elite netball player. She's currently vice-captain of the Scottish netball team, having competed at 2 Commonwealth Games and 2 World Cups. Emily also captains Scotland's only semi-professional netball team, Sirens, in the UK Super League. Welcome, Emily. To Emily's right, Vicky Phillips. Vicky's the Director of Occupational Health, Hygiene and Wellbeing at Scottish Power. She's over 25 years' experience as a nurse and has been working in occupational health at Scottish Power for 21 years, working throughout the Scottish Power Group, providing occupational health and wellbeing initiatives to the organisation. As part of the health and safety team, she's committed to supporting and promoting health and wellbeing. She believes that keeping things simple and achievable encourages employees to adopt positive health behaviours and make positive lifestyle changes to ensure they're both fit for life as well as fit for work. And that's Vicky. And then at the far right is Billy Watson. Billy has over 25 years' experience in the third sector, including over a decade at RNIB and 12 years in various management roles within the NHS. He's served as CEO of SAMH, Scottish Action for Mental Health, since 2008. Under Billy's leadership, the organisation has celebrated its centenary year in 2023 and is now poised to embark on its fourth transformational strategy, reaffirming its dedication to providing comprehensive mental health support across Scotland. Beyond his professional achievements, Billy's commitment to social impact and community engagement is evident through his tenure as a trustee chair of the Big Hearts Community Trust, leaving behind a legacy of charitable work and advocacy at the end of his term. He's now joined the advisory board of the Scottish Prison Service as a non-executive director, assisting the board with oversight in key areas such as health and wellbeing, human rights, risks, safety and performance monitoring. Could I ask you to show your appreciation to the panel? Thank you. I'd like to kick off by asking the sort of quite general question, but maybe getting all of your thoughts on that. How can organisations support work-life balance and prevent employee burnout? If I can maybe start with you, Laura.
Yeah, I think raising awareness of what burnout can look like within and different symptoms of burnout and what that build-up can be within your staff and within your organisation can really make a difference as to empowering the staff and employees to recognise that within themselves. I think it's really important as well for organisations to support and provide training and education for any line managers and leadership teams to allow them to potentially recognise any symptoms of that burnout or what that looks like, and to empower staff to manage that work-life balance within themselves, and providing the tools that can address some of those problems or issues that people may be facing. Everyone experiences throughout their personal life or their professional life stress or overwhelm in different ways. And I think it's raising that awareness and providing those support tools and methods that people can use in a preventative manner, as well as addressing the issue if it does lead to burnout.
Yeah, thanks very much. And moving on, Emily, you're in the legal profession, as indeed I am. It's a profession which gets a reputation for people burning out quite early. How did Vincent Masons cope with that, and particularly what's your experience been, burnout?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I like to think I'm probably a bit of an expert in terms of balancing, having lots on my plate in terms of people heard. I'm also a professional netballer alongside being a lawyer. And I think I'm actually really fortunate to be at Vincent's because that's kind of at the forefront of their minds. So Vincent's are one of 3 founding members of the Mindful Business Charter, which came in 2018. So it was Barclays and Addershaw Goddard that came up with this idea, and the whole concept behind it is to really get rid of avoidable stress. So I think it's so important that employers really consider things like allowing people when they have time off to recognise that it's really important that they actually take that space away. So for me as a netballer, it's so important that when I go away for competitions that I'm not constantly getting emails or feeling like I need to be checking in. And my experience to date so far has been that has been totally respected, and knowing that that time is protected for me is so important because it really allows me to focus on what my passion is. And I remember when I first applied for the job, like one of the first questions was, well, how do you balance it all? And I actually think one of my answer was it actually makes me a better lawyer. And I think it's really important for employers to recognise that having that balance outside of work, whatever it is really important. And as you said, it can be really stressful being in a law firm, but I think it's about realising that there's always going to be stressful moments, but how do you handle that? And it's actually trying to hold yourself accountable in those stressful moments, that actually, is there anything that's really important as your mental health and your well-being? And I almost feel fortunate because when for my netball, I have to go, I'm contracted, I have to go to training. So for me, it's almost easier at a junior stage to get up and to get out and to go to training because I know I have to do that. But sometimes I think where employers can fall down, or maybe it's when you're at that junior level, you're not as confident that it's hard when you don't have maybe other commitments outside of work to be brave enough to get up and say, actually, I just want to go to have dinner with my friends. But I think that's obviously echoed within the Mindful Business Charter, something within Pinsents are really receptive of, is that idea that actually going away and getting that time out can be really beneficial to actually allow you to be fresher when you tackle your work. So it's something that I feel as if I've managed to balance really well so far, hopefully my career, and hopefully it continues.
Well, that sounds positive. Hopefully it will. Vicky, from your perspective, working Scottish Power, major PLC, lots of pressures from that. What's been your experience of getting that balance to prevent burnout stuff?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. I think just as two colleagues have said here, it's about being able to recognise it. So that starts with good line manager training, which we've embarked all our line managers on the SAMH training, which is excellent. So if you're not able to spot the signs and symptoms early, then you can't intervene early. My experience, as I say, over 20 years in occupational health was in the early days, what we were actually seeing people referred to occupational health at a really late stage. And then we were having to they were off sick, we were having to put them into counselling, whereas we were kind of thinking if we could only intervene to prevent that sort of damaging effect, it would make a difference. And that starts with line manager training, and I think creating a culture where people can say at an early stage, I'm actually not okay with this. But that in large organisations such as Scottish Power, that's really difficult to recognise that actually people can say, at the pinch points that maybe they're struggling, and recognising that individuals have got lots of other things going on. So it's might just be work pressures, they might have things going on in their home lives as well. So it's about seeing individuals as holistic beings. So, we've very much got what we call a sort of 5 health and wellbeing essentials, which is looking at all of that. So that's your physical health, your mental health, looking at diet, exercise, and how that impacts on individuals.
Thanks. And Billy, I guess at SAMH, it's quite an interesting one for you because you're strong advocates about the need and the benefits of getting that balance, but you're also a major employer in terms of having people with the demands that every other major employer has. How do you balance that?
Sure. And I think, people might expect us to be excellent or expert in this, and I don't think we are. I think we pay a lot of attention to it. It is a strategic priority for us, as you might expect. And our strategy around this is largely, I think as Vicky was saying, we have a prevention and early intervention strategy for this. And some of it is just, as it would be in any business or organisation, it's about knowing your audience. And in this case, it's a staff audience. And creating a culture where, from our point of view, 64% of our 550 staff have a self-disclosed mental health problem, either currently or in their past. So this is a workforce that you need to know, because they might have different things that affect them relative to other more broadly based workforces. So first, I think make it a strategic priority, and that starts with leadership. This has got to be important right at the top of the agenda, and authentically so. So I hope we get that bit right. And then you need to know your baselines. What is it you're trying to tackle? So actually, whilst this is a very emotional subject and it's a very people-focused subject, you need data and you need to know your baseline. So we relentlessly survey our staff in terms of multiple things, but very often around their own health and well-being. So the kind of anticipatory element of our strategy is quite high. We can usually see things coming, we can see changes in the workforce, and quite often for them, their triggers might be different based on such a high percentage of people who are disclosing some mental health problems. So it makes it easier to make reasonable adjustments. And I don't think around mental well-being, I know we're talking generally about well-being at work here, but mental well-being at work, triggers and adjustments can look a bit different. And I think you have to have a slightly deeper understanding of that, and that's going to be very centred on the individual. So that's where we go then, is on the nuts and bolts of it, where all of our managers go through our own training and that we then work with others on. And things like performance and supervision are absolutely vital. You know, every time, and we audit it, and we're not perfect at it by any means, but every time someone has a performance or supervision session with their staff, the first question they will be asked is about their mental well-being. And they'll be asked lots of things about their job and how's it going, but the first concern is about the individual. And that's something really simple, but it lands really well. And it might not be the first performance and supervision when someone opens up, but if you're systematically asking that question time after time, I think you get to the place where earlier intervention is really important. And then just keep those measures in place. You know, I think one of the things I'm most proud of actually internally is, you know, our sickness levels were high. The predominant feature, once you diagnose your sickness levels and what's behind it, mental health historically was the biggest reason that someone would be off work in our place. Not now, and our sickness is actually tumbling down to the lowest it's been in a decade, you know, and that's post-pandemic. So there's some different bits of the ingredients I think hopefully we're getting right, but it's never a job done, that's for sure. And but I think creating a culture where people feel able through performance and supervision, and then you can work out what those reasonable adjustments might be, is definitely a really basic but good thing to do.
I thought it was really interesting you picked up in culture, because I was going to ask about that, and particularly, Vicky, in your situation, it's fine having a philosophy that people want to look after staff, they want strong mental well-being and physical well-being, but what happens when the parent company's screaming for results to be prepared? Does it go out the window? How do you cope with that?
That is a real challenge, obviously, because we are owned by the Iberdrola Group, so a Spanish-based organisation. So that brings its own challenges, but that, for me, I was going to pick on what Billy said there, is that's where leadership is really, really important, because it has to be authentic. People would expect me to stand up and talk about the importance of mental health, and that's where we were lucky in terms of, we found a mental health steering group that's actually led by a lady called Nicola Connolly, who's head of our procurement function, not somebody that you would traditionally expect to kind of stand up at board level to start talking about mental health, but she does, and that's made a huge difference. And then in addition to that, there again, as Billy's already said, if you think about your data, it's actually having that data, the sort of hard facts. So we were able to do a survey of our workforce, which was quite a task to actually ask, could we go out to all employees and ask about mental health? But we did it, and the results were pretty stark, that showed we were doing some things well, which was good, but actually in terms of the culture was something we needed to tackle, and the training. And I think once we got that on board, we actually had some hard data to say, this is what our employees have said, and that's what's made the difference in terms of then maybe starting to try and push back. It's by no means perfect. At the end of the day, in a large commercial organisation, you're always going to have those pinch points, whether it's, you know, year end, etc. But it's actually then recognising that, you know, we do need to look after our employees, because, as I always say, they are the most important asset that we have at Scottish Power, and they need to be looked after like we do all the other assets that we've got.
Interesting, and I guess the same question, Emily, for you, because the legal profession, there'll be deadlines, clients shouting, they need this by yesterday. How does your organisation cope with that and balance?
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Billy and Vicky speak. It was something that really resonated with me, is the fact about how it flows down from leadership, and that's something I'm probably more acutely aware of than other maybe junior lawyers, because with my athlete hat on, I'm a leader in different capacities in my team, so something that I've had to learn is how to lead, and that is through being authentic. And I always say that you should never try to lead, you should just do it how you are. And so for me, that looks like training how I would expect all my other teammates to train, and I think that totally transpires into the workplace. So for example, like when I say if we were really busy, but I know that the partner team's still going to go and do a spin class for an hour, like that makes me feel as if it's okay for me to go and do something. And I think you're right. I think it's about facing the challenge head on, that there are going to be stress points, but it's actually about the culture again that you create. And for me, that in stressful environments through sport and work, it's teamwork that really helps and adds value. So I know if I need to go to a training session, someone's going to help pick up my workload, but also vice versa, that I'll do it for them. And that's because you create an atmosphere where you trust each other and you get to know each other. And I think you can start to read when people are stressed or they need a hand, and you'd like to think that people are ebbing and flowing at different times. So, I mean, if everyone's going down at the same time, that's when it becomes an issue. But it is facing the challenge head on, and it's not about waiting for the issue to arise, it's trying to systematically make changes. So just really being aware of people's work patterns, being mindful with your delegation and making, if you are giving work to other people, really being realistic with timeframes, etc. There's no point saying, oh, that's due for tomorrow morning, when actually you're not going to look at it for a couple of days. So there's actually avoidable actions that everyone can take, and it's only when you probably sit down and think about it. I know I've been guilty of giving our trainees a task and then actually realising, oh, I wasn't going to look at that for a couple of days, so I probably could have given her any extra time. So yeah, I think it's actually, I always check and challenge myself as an athlete, and I think it's really important to do that in the workspace as well, because it's so easy just to get into a pattern of behaviour, but only once you actually sit down and look at yourself is when you can realise the gains and reflections that you can make.
And I think I've seen over my career the importance of the leaders in the organisation, not just talking about culture, but actually doing it and living by what they're saying. Have you seen that, Laura? Have you the experience of strong leadership that's helped develop that?
Yes, definitely. And I think within the events industry, it's maybe quite different to some of the kind of corporate organisations, or where the workforce are in place for a lot longer periods of time. So within the event industry, we can have people on board for a number of years, but then you can also have members of staff that are coming on board for quite short-term contracts. And as a workforce manager, you want to give that same level of experience, positive experience, and a safe working environment for anyone that comes on board that works within the event. I've seen the examples where, and again, it's just echoing what everyone else has said, that leadership, which really drives down and filters through the organisation, where you're empowered, from when I've been empowered from my leaders to really convey messages, to create a safe space for my teams. But I've also worked another way where you've not had that leadership, and there's maybe not been the focus and that kind of empowerment that comes from the organisation, which, and again, what Emily has said, within the event, you are all working towards the same deadline. So if everyone is going down together, you're all at those stress points, usually at the same time. So it's really important for those managers and that leadership to create that culture, to utilise the expertise within the organisation to really try and prepare people as much as possible, to monitor, delegate in the build-up to the event, recognising those pinch points, so that when people are going into that highly stressful period where the deadline's not moving and you've got a lot of expectation, you're going in with your best possible head on, you've got your resilience, and you're ready to go instead of already having reached burnout. So I've seen it from a couple of different directions. But I think that real empowerment of staff, and people being able to take that autonomy that comes from the leadership in that direction, makes such a difference.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to go back a bit to 2020 and the pandemic, where I think we'd all probably agree absolutely changed the workplace, changed the way employees think, the way employees work, and so on. And I'm interested in your own experiences within your own organisations of how you coped with that and what you had to change. Billy, maybe start with you in terms of...
Sure. Just as I'm doing that, come back to one point, particularly when you were asking the question about those who are in more commercially driven organisations and how this agenda all works. I mean, this makes sense. I mean, last year in Scotland, we lost 1.6 million days at work across all sectors in Scotland through mental health problems. Somebody declaring they're off sick because of their mental well-being. 1.6 million days, 8 billion it costs. And so I always say this, because particularly in commercial firms where they are being driven maybe slightly differently and culturally and by other organisations, that this makes economic sense. It's the right thing to do as a good employer, but it actually makes economic sense. And the studies are there. I would encourage your managers, your directors to go and look at them. the best in class in mental well-being in the workplace, for every £1 they invest, it returns 5. Some of that will be profit, a lot of it will be productivity. And it's there, so that's always worth just hanging on to. Anyway, to your point, Ian, so for us, there was a few things going on, I guess. One of the things that happened immediately after the pandemic was what I would call, there was displaced help seeking. So as the system was, in such stress and taking time to recover, people who were not at their best mentally and were increasing in number just at the time the system was not able to offer them very much. So we saw across the country, and we still see today, displaced help seeking, people being either deflated or defeated by a mental health system that they're struggling to get into. And sometimes their threshold of mental illness or non-well-being isn't high enough to actually to get anywhere inside the system. They go looking elsewhere. And we saw that a lot as an organisation. So as well as looking after, the well-being and the welfare of our own team, we were being inundated with people coming to an organisation like ours saying, can you help? I'm getting nowhere with the system. I can't see my GP. And week by week, I am feeling worse. And I'm concerned for myself. And that was a big challenge. Because this session is about workplace well-being. So it was displacing itself to organisations like us. It was also displacing itself to workplaces. I think most workplaces and the trends that you could look at over the last 3 years in terms of people presenting at their work expecting help and actually not very well, possibly shouldn't be there. And productivity levels are going down. If you look at the Scottish Productivity Index in Scotland, it's actually dropping in some places. And a lot of that, I think, is attributed to, we'll still do all the work, but poor mental well-being. The other place it was displacing to, and still is into community settings. Here we are, in and around, a major athletics events. The other people who were approaching an organisation like ours was local community clubs, running clubs, athletic clubs. There were quite a number of suicides in the athletics clubs of Scotland in the last 2 or 3 years, and they hadn't experienced it and the ripple effects of those. So because the system was under such duress, it was landing in these places, and a lot of it was work, and a lot of it was community settings. So we've kind of been trying to work in those places and settings to help them respond and build capacity. For ourselves, we had an organisational development plan which was in place before the pandemic, and it had 6 pillars to it, and we were working on it probably as a 3 to 5 year plan. And one of those pillars was engagement, culture and well-being. And we basically agreed for about 18 to 24 months to put the other 5 pillars to one side and just to concentrate on the well-being pillar of our organisational development plan. Don't get me wrong, there was some collateral in terms of other things we had to slow down, some of our workforce development, for example. But we had a strategic context to say we can actually dial that down for a couple of years and really dial this up, which was our well-being pillar. Some really practical things that we did, and they cost. So this investment of trying to get a return on your pound that you spend, we gave every member of staff 2 additional days for well-being purposes, and you had to speak to your manager about that on top of your annual leave. So your annual leave was your annual leave, but you got 2 additional well-being. We also created well-being team budgets because we all became so isolated in pandemic times, and our work patterns changed, and you could go a year without seeing a colleague that you used to see most days. So to foster that, we had a sum that we allocated per capita, so 500 times a sum, but you had to spend it as a team. So you would come together and you maybe had £500 or £1,000 in your kitty, and you could all go off and do yoga together, or you could do something together. And we did that in the pandemic, and we've kept it. It's not that big a sum, but man, it was meaningful, and it meant people were doing something for their well-being, but not on their own. They were doing it with colleagues. So those well-being team budgets we've held on to. And then last year we put a third measure in, which was well-being festivals, staff well-being festivals. I can see 1 or 2 smiles there from people I recognise. So we did staff well-being festivals last year during our centenary year. And again, that was about take the day off. You're actually working, but take the day off, come to work and come to one of these festivals and spend the day with some of your other colleagues and do lots of mindful things. So whether that was walking the canals, painting, yoga, mindfulness sessions, and we did 4 of them, and we got about just under 50% of the whole workforce to come to these Wellbeing Festival days. And I mean, I've been at IBS, I've been at SAMH a wee while, and I've never seen staff feedback like it. It was unbelievable in terms of just saying, thanks for letting us go and have a fun day with another 70 colleagues in Dundee. We did 4, 1 in Aberdeen, 1 in Dundee, Glasgow and Edinburgh. And we're going to keep that going. And that's all thoughtful stuff. A lot of it's staff driven. They told us what they would like to do and how we would create some of those things. So that was actually, would we have done that if the pandemic hadn't happened? I'm not sure we'd have done the I think we were intended to do the Wellbeing Days and then accelerated them, but the team budgets and the festivals, I think, have been a real boon. And then communication. So we are internal communication goes out about once a week for different purposes. And it always finishes with your personal well-being. Remember, take your wellbeing days, spend your wellbeing budget. Here's the link to the EAP service. Here's the online toolkits that are on the intranet. And there's just relentless messaging saying, pay attention to yourself. I mean, I've got more, but I've been talking for too long. So those were just some things that I think the heightened concern we had for our own people kind of forced something we probably should have been doing anyway.
That's interesting. And Vicky, from your perspective, Scottish Power, what happened during it and how did things change after?
Well, initially for me and the sort of health team, it was kind of a how are we going to sort of give that immediate health advice in terms of COVID and keeping everybody safe. So it was, myself, the nursing and the doctor team were very much giving that advice from a physical aspect, and all the team were then engaged in doing callbacks from anybody who either had a family member that tested positive to COVID or if they tested positive, so we could try and give that advice and support, which was really valued by our employees because, as you know, the NHS was sort of toiling and employees valued that contact. Then we kind of progressed to put everything online, which for me, if you told me over 3 years ago that you could actually have meaningful counselling over Zoom, I would have said absolutely no way. But actually we found that worked really, really well. So people were able to access all our services virtually, so from counselling to even online physiotherapy as well, which we've continued to do. But probably the communication engagement moving on from the immediate sort of physical advice and help was vital as well. Therefore, every month what we did is we picked a different topic, different mental health topic, and did a live session where we'd invite an expert in to deliver, whatever topics of choice from mental health, whatever they wanted. And then they would have the opportunity to feedback using Slido. So we had that constant engagement where people could feedback as well. But we also recognised that there was the other aspect was the sort of physical health. So we previously had sort of gyms that obviously all had to close and the fitness advisors. So we switched all that online as well. So rather than people being able to come into gyms, we then got live stream sessions where people could do exercise classes in their own home and have sort of online challenges as well, which there again we've sustained because for me it's about making your health and wellbeing resources available to everybody. And I think that's one thing that COVID probably really helped for us because it's not just about your office-based employees. Obviously, we've got employees all over the UK. We've got industrial employees. We've got people who work shifts. So there again, it was shifting all those resources to making sure they're accessible. And it was looking at the sort of physical and mental aspects as well.
Yeah, Emily, just picking up on that because I know I'm interested in the netball experience because obviously sport shut for a while, particularly indoor sport. How did you and your teammates cope with that just being taken away? Presumably that was quite difficult.
Yeah, it was all quite crazy for us because we were meant to be going to Wales the weekend that the lockdown was happening, and I remember having phone calls with the coach debating whether we're going to go down, and all of a sudden something that you do every day that drives your daily decisions is gone, and we're used to being around your teammates constantly, and that's really your support network, and all of a sudden I went back to my family house, you've got no access to your gym equipment, etc. So your daily habits were just totally changed. So it definitely was really challenging. And I think it's just like a workplace that we had the same challenges of how do you stay connected as a team. I'm sure everyone did virtual bingo, virtual quizzes, all that. But what I found so important actually was just keeping my body moving every day, and that was such a nice space for my mental well-being. And at the same time, as well as everything I know from a sporting background changing, I also qualified as a lawyer and joined Pinsent's during lockdown and didn't get to meet anyone for 6 months. So that was a really bizarre experience to get your laptop through the post and all of a sudden you work at Pinsent Masons and you have to work. So that was an interesting challenge for me personally, and I think actually that's where it comes down to actually small habits and small behaviours of people make a big difference. And so, for example, as a brand new person, it would be really difficult for me to make a Zoom Teams call or something, because I didn't know them that well. So for a partner or someone else in our team to make a Teams call was, although it was probably a tiny thing that they didn't even think about, to have that face-to-face contact made such a big difference. And I think now it's actually, obviously we've talked about the importance of leadership and everything, recognising well-being, but until you actually get to just enjoy your getting to know each other, so touching on the point that Billy talked about of getting to know each other outside of work, I think it's actually really important. And we don't necessarily have a schedule of we have to do something social every month or whatever, but we've continued to do team socials throughout the year, and for me actually they're one of the most beneficial things we can do, because you do see everyone that can be in that stressful work experience, but when you see them outside of work and you build that relationship, it kind of takes the barrier down, and you feel that if you, for example, if I did have any concerns about my well-being, I would now feel like I know them well enough to go to them as a person rather than just a member of the team. So I think that is crucially important to keep going. And I don't know if anyone smashed the whole well-being thing through lockdown, but I think it's so important to, again, check and challenge, and anything that you did, learn from it. So the fact that we can now really respect, flexible work patterns, we can use Zoom calls, we can use team calls, it doesn't need to be in person. I think all that stuff's really important. And even from a netball and sporting perspective now, realising it doesn't need to be so rigid and everyone has to train exactly at the same place, allowing people to have a breathing space to go and do your own sessions, so important. So yeah, I think there was so many lessons taken from it, and it's really important. And as an athlete, something really important for me is to analyse and improve on it. So I think that's something that will hopefully, Pinsent's and through my netball, we've done really well so far.
Yeah, I think it has opened up opportunities. I certainly find my working life, my ability to do the two things has helped dramatically by not having to be physically there. Laura, for you, it must have been quite difficult, because I would imagine the event sector shut down, didn't it, for quite a long time? So you would have had the added pressure of that. How did you and your colleagues you worked with cope?
Yeah, so it was a strange time. I was, when we went into lockdown, I was working for the UEFA and the Euro 2020, and we all got made redundant with a view to coming back if the event ever was to be held again. But I was already very, very fortunate that I had been in an interview process for the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, and I was offered a job the day after I was made redundant. So I was in a very fortunate position. But even going into the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, the uncertainty, we were 2 years away from when we first went into that lockdown, but the uncertainty of what does that look like. So all of the employees that we had within the Commonwealth Games at that point, you had that underlying worry, am I going to lose my job? When's it going to happen? When will we ever have a decision that this is definitely going to go ahead? And that uncertainty really was quite overwhelming, and people dealt with it in different ways. And again, we're coming back to leadership of how that was handled within the organisation. And within our board and our senior leadership team and our Chief Executive Officer, Ian Reid at the time, they led from a very authentic, vulnerable place, where they also, kind of were honest about their feelings of uncertainty, and they were honest within their communications. They made it that no question was a silly question, or that they really addressed the concerns of the workforce, and any updates that came were filtered down to the organisation, so that you felt that you were always on the front foot. So having that uncertainty was definitely very difficult. Also having to react and your plans constantly changing. So you would be working on a plan of the project of this is what it looks like, and then you're into another lockdown, so everything changes again. If you can't handle change, or if you're not used to handling change and having to be quite agile in that respect, it could be, again, very, very stressful on your own well-being. Looking back, it's something that I've learned from, it's something that I now see as a benefit, but at the time, felt very, very stressful. But then just picking up on the positives as well, people got creative. Because things were changing all the time, it meant that everybody had a voice, and it meant that people could speak up and offer different ways of, sometimes events run on this is how it's always been done, so this is how you do it. Whereas it really gave the opportunity to look at things in a different way. And there was a number of firsts within the Commonwealth Games across a number of the different departments. Some successful, some not successful, but it was trying something new.
Okay, I've got other questions here, but I want at this stage just see if anybody on the floor has anything that they want to ask. Yeah.
Next week, that working? Yeah. Next week, the championship's workforce is going to swell by about 400 people as volunteers come on board. As workforce manager, how do you prepare for that? During selection, are people sort of weeded out that might think cause problems? What are your plans for during the championships when you get this additional 400 people in? And what do you do for people who've been rejected after they've applied as volunteers?
Yes, great question. So the volunteer programs that I've managed in the past, we've always been oversubscribed. So it is trying to manage the expectations when people are applying as to what the process and the stages are. And in all honesty, usually, the people that are applying, they would be able, most people would come in and do an amazing job, and it is just a matter of there is only this number of people. So unfortunately, sometimes it can be a bit of the luck of the draw. It's a different workforce manager for this event, so I can't speak to their selection processes. But I think in terms of preparation, and it's actually quite difficult for volunteers coming into a major event. You're coming in as a volunteer, giving your time. Before you've even got to the event, you've already given time of going to interviews, selection processes, training, and then you're going to come in and do your shifts. You're excited, you're looking forward to it. And what for me has always been so important is that we train our staff who are managing the volunteers to ensure that whatever is going on behind the scenes, from a paid staff or a contractor, you're like the swan, where you do not project that onto the volunteer workforce that are coming to support and help and are such an essential part of the delivery of this event. So in terms of that preparation, definitely making sure that the workforce are prepared to help support the volunteers coming on board. Hopefully as well, the volunteers will have received the right communication. They'll feel that they've got their right initial training, that they know where they're going to turn up, they know what they've got to wear, they know what they have to bring, and then that they are then briefed appropriately at the start of each shift, so that they're comfortable in the role that they're going out to do. And it's so important to maintain that element of fun, and for, like I say, whatever's going on behind the scenes, it is not projected or brought within the volunteer programme.
Billy, could I bring you in? Because at this championship, we have tried very hard we've got the SAMH partnership and trying to use that to help the volunteers. Do you want to say just quickly a bit about that?
And there's a person sitting in the room who I think could say more. So for the first time that I can think of, for a major championships in the country, we are a mental health charity partner to that. And partly the great question there about volunteers and expectations and how they feel before, during and after the games is really important in terms of their own mental health and resilience. And there's a lot going on in a short window, and then it comes to an end. And for a while we've been working up a model to try and help with that. And we tried to land it for the team that was going to Birmingham in 22 and didn't quite manage to pull that off. So this is the first championships where we're designing that in. Robert Nesbitt, who's our head of sport and physical activities, in the audience. And if you want to maybe pass the mic back, Robert, just give us a quick flavour of what's happening here, because I can't think of another event like this where all the volunteers, including those who didn't make the selection cut, actually got some mental health awareness training to say, if you don't make it, still take this as a takeaway about mental health and yourself. And I hope that's the kind of added value we can continue to have for major events, because they're events like no other. Do you know, the scale of them, the pressure of them, and it's not just the competition and the athletes. It's everything that sits behind it. It's a really tense environment over a really short period of time, and I think we could help with future championships. So we'll see how this one goes, but I'm thrilled actually that we're getting down to that level of support. But Robert, do you want to say a word?
Yeah. I've got a loud water. There we go. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we have done working with the team behind the championship is that 720 volunteers that were going through a particular stage who might not be selected going forward. It was really important for the partnership that we had and the team that they received some engagement around their mental well-being, and we delivered to that group as well. We've then extended that further. This week, myself and Kirsty, who's sitting next to me, will be working with nearly 400 volunteers to introduce more mental health awareness to that group. So we're building more capacity in there so that they can look after their mental health. And we've also got a number of wellbeing championships. The gentleman sitting next to me is one of the volunteers here at the Games, and he has put himself forward to be one of those championships where we're going to be building more capacity, so that not only have we got champions and people that understand mental health at a deeper level at the championships over the 3 days, but actually are there to be able to support each other as well within that space. And that's really, really important. And alongside that, we have also committed to providing support to those volunteers throughout that period. So they'll have contact with us so that if things are happening or they want some advice, they will be able to get that. So we've really thought about this really closely in partnership with the team. And that's really unusual, because I don't think at any event have we seen that depth of thinking that's come into this, and that's been what's making this a really strong partnership.
And if you're in St Enoch Square on the Saturday or the Sunday, the championships, go and visit the Mental Wellbeing on Wheels bus. It'll be good fun, and it'll probably be good for you as well.
Thanks very much to both of you. Any other questions from the floor? One at the back. We'll get the microphone to you, sir.
Thank you. Not exactly a question, but maybe an observation from the panel. We've worked on lots of events through the years from a branding and comms perspective, and it seems like finally the mandate's changed to have these events to deliver on policies like mental health, social equity, sustainability. How optimistic are you about the well-being aspect of this that events can deliver? I know we've talked specifically about the volunteers and the teams, but it feels like quite a big deal to tackle that we're all tackling in society now. How can events like this have a proper impact, maybe past, after the event's gone or left town?
I may maybe say a couple of words first and then pass it over. I think it's a hugely important point. I mean, I've been involved in co-chairing the steering group for this, and the more I've looked at the event, the more I realise that if we're going to expect cities like Glasgow, Event Scotland, agencies like Event Scotland to put money into events like this, they want to see some return. And that return, I think, is most clearly demonstrated through the whole sustainability angle. So I think the involvement of partners like SAMH is really, really important. I think the volunteering opportunities that gives people really important. And we have to actually, from a sports perspective, it's hugely important to me that we can demonstrate that, because I fear if we don't, then cities just won't be prepared to spend the money on bringing events like this in. So I think it's really important. But does anybody else want to pick up particularly?
I think for me, legacy is a big part of it. Legacy is quite a strong word in terms of what that means. But like you say, the partnerships with existing organisations that are still going to be here after the event leaves town are really, really important, and doing the work beforehand and prioritising that work. It's something whether it's sustainability, whether it's well-being, or whatever the objective is to really embed that and integrate it from the beginning and the inception of the event, and integrate it throughout and post-event as well, and not allow it to drop off because the priority of delivering the event becomes too big. So from a workforce perspective, it's making sure that we do the workforce planning and we staff and allocate that appropriately, so that it's not a forgotten, it's a nice to do, it's actually something that post-event, whatever that legacy looks like, it's been given the time and the thought process to pick up. And really, you know, I have no doubt this is going to be an incredibly successful event and it's going to be celebrated. So let's use that high, let's use that, the celebration of that event to kind of shine a light on SAMI, shine a light on volunteering or sustainable, whatever else the city or the country wants to offer. So I think it's becoming more and more important, like you say, and it's something that's, once the event leaves town, you've got still a network of people committed to benefiting from it.
To pick up. And I would just add quickly on the legacy side that I think we've seen a tremendous legacy in athletics in Scotland because of the Commonwealth Games. And that's been down to others out with those involved in the day-to-day preparation of the event. People like the clubs in Scotland really grasped that a couple of years before, and the clubs were ready, so that when people watched Usain Bolt run at Hampden, wanted an experience, these clubs picked them up and did a fantastic job. And I think you look at the Scottish athletes we're going to have here next weekend, the Laura Muirs and the Gemma Reekies and Josh Kerrs, and a lot of that is down to legacy and the great work that people have done. So I don't think it's anybody's job, but we all have to, as a community who are interested in sport, get out there and try and push this. And if we do, we can start seeing great results. I'm very aware of time, and I just want to challenge the panel to give a very quick 15, 20-second response and to say, well-being in the workplace. If there was one message they'd take away, I always like coming to these things and having the nugget that I can take away and I remember a year after. So what's the nugget that you would say about well-being in the workplace? Billy, I'm going to start at you and I'll give the others a bit more time to think.
Cheers. 15 seconds, I always find that tough. Start with stigma and leadership and culture. Everything else can become a flow from that. If you've got a culture that is positive around mental well-being, you'll do well. Start with raising awareness. Get so people are more aware. Then give them knowledge and information so they know more. And the holy grail is when you get to behaviour change and we all start acting differently, you know you're succeeding.
Thank you. Vicky?
Yeah, just to build on that, the key thing for me is keep it really simple. I think if you make it really complicated, you just switch people off. So it's consistent, simple messages. The other thing is make sure it's accessible for everybody. So it's not one size fits all. You have to think if you're doing something on physical activity, you're going to have your folk that love going to the gym, but you're going to have the people that they'd rather just sofa surfers, that you actually just, how are you going to get them active? So it's something for everybody, making sure it's equal access. And it's just being encouraging and making sure there is that leadership and that commitment and permission for employees to be encouraged to take part.
Emily?
I think it's most important to remember that workforce are people. At the end of the day, you're dealing with humans, and I perform best at sport when I'm happy and I perform best at work when I'm happy. So it's really about just remembering that it's people first approach and that everyone's got emotions, so just being highly aware of that.
Thank you. And Laura?
And then for me, line manager training, it's the interaction that most staff members will have, that space where they can check in, and for line managers to ask the right questions and almost become little detectives, because it's very hard to speak up, and it's very hard to talk about if you're in a difficult position, or if you're feeling overwhelmed or struggling with your mental health or well-being. So allowing that platform, asking the right questions, and supporting the managers on how to deal with that.
That's great. I think I would just sum up by saying, I think my view would be the takeaway would be people are more important than organisations. And if we remember that, then we'll treat people properly and the organisation gets the benefit. Can I just thank all of the panel? We've reached the end of what's been a very quick, almost an hour. But if I can just thank all of the panel for their contributions, I think we've got some real experience and some great listening, great learning here today. So if I could thank from the left, Laura, Emily, Vicky and Billy, if you could maybe put your hands together.
The Museum of World Athletics Indoor Athletics collection has arrived in Glasgow. We are based in St Enoch's Centre, the biggest shopping mall right in the centre of the city, and we are open from 11 AM in the morning to 6 PM in the evening every day.
It's really special today because not only is the museum opening, but we also get to see the medals for the World Indoor Championship, and we get to see them for the first time today as well. So it's a really special occasion, and yeah, just building up the excitement for the World Indoor Athletics Championships coming to Glasgow very, very soon.
I think the medals are really nice. I think it's great to have a memoir like that and to have something that the athletes can remember. Hopefully I'll be on the wall here one day, but I don't know, I guess we'll see.
Well, I mean, the museum, it's like a snapshot of everything athletics. I mean, it allows you to look back and see things over the years, and yes, it's all in one place here. If you want to see athletics, you want to get inspired, then here you come.
If you like sport, we're bringing over 120 countries to your city, and this is going to be an epic start to that festival. So 1 month in St Enoch's Centre, come and visit MOA International Indoor Athletics Exhibition.
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion on mental health and wellbeing in sport. We've got a super panel for this evening's discussion, and I will introduce you to them all. So we'll start with Ailey Doyle here. Ailey's a former athlete, and she's an ambassador for the World Indoor Championships this year in Glasgow. Ailey competed in both the 400 hurdles and the 400 metres, and she was a sort of regular member of Team GB in Northern Ireland and amassed an overall tally of 17 major international podium places, which is still the top by any Scot so far, although Laura Muir's close on the heels. She represented Great Britain at the 2012 Olympic Games in London and won an Olympic bronze medal in the 4x400 metres relay at the 2016 Games in Rio. And of course, she memorably won the silver medal at the 2014 Commonwealth Games here in Glasgow. And she's won numerous world and European indoor medals, including silver at the 2019 European Athletics Indoor Championships in Glasgow. Moving on, we have Katrina Bass. Katrina is a performance lifestyle practitioner working for Sport Scotland's Institute of Sport. And Katrina provides individualised coaching, mentoring and counselling services to support high-performance athletes to manage the transitions, challenges and choices encountered within the performance environment and in life away from sport. Having formerly been a national level competitor in both athletics and rowing, Katrina now focuses on playing netball at club level in Edinburgh. We have Robert Nesbitt. Robert is lead for physical activity and sport at Scottish Action for Mental Health, SAMH. And Robert has over 28 years' knowledge and experience of working in the third sector in Scotland. And he's played a lead role in the strategic development and delivery of services within mental health, ARBD, addictions and long-term conditions across children and young people, adults and older people. Robert's been involved in both national and global research and evaluation programmes within Scotland, the UK, Canada and Australia. And this has included research and evaluation programmes including on men's mental health, and the influence of menopause on individuals' mental health and engagement in physical activity. Robert's also held various chair and vice chair positions, including Glasgow's Mental Health Providers Network, Creative Arts Charity and sporting bodies, and Robert's a member of Scotland's Movement for Health Coalition, Scottish Government Development Advisor Group, and part of a UK Mental Health Advisory Group for physical activity and sport. And then last but not least, Barbara Knox, who is a juniors convener at Springburn Harriers. Barbara is a valuable member of the Springburn Harriers Athletics Club, performing several roles for the club. She's the juniors convener, where she's part of the very large team of coaches and volunteers that look after nearly 300 junior athletes. She's also part of the welfare team that looks after the athletes from a holistic point of view and is very keen on making sure athletes, coaches and volunteers at the club are mentally healthy as well as physically healthy. She still competes for the club at cross-country, road and track and field competitions and volunteers her time to coach a throws group twice a week. And in addition to this, Barbara officiates at local and national competitions, finding this an important way to give back to the sport and a great way to see young athletes progress through the ranks, especially as her two sons also compete for the club. So welcome to all of our panellists. So welcome to the panel. I'm going to start the discussion with a high-level question, which I'll ask all of the panellists to comment on. And the question is, who is responsible for athlete mental health and well-being? And Ayla, I'm going to start with you here because you've got a unique perspective. You've been through, as a kid, you've been through the schools and the club structure, and you've worked your way on to become a top-level world-class athlete with all of the stresses that go with that. Can you give us your perspective on that question? Who's responsible for athlete mental health and well-being?
Yeah, it's funny. I think if you'd asked me that as an athlete, I probably would have just said me. It was me as an athlete. It was my responsibility to look after my own mental health and my mindset. And I think, you know, the further I got in my career and sort of where I am now, that answer would be different, you know, and there's I think everybody should be responsible, but in different ways, because different people have different roles, they have different authority, different power, and, you know, but as an athlete, I took it very much on myself that it's my responsibility, and that's quite hard sometimes because there was points when I struggled and wasn't really sure what to do and didn't really know, you know, how to deal with it myself. And when I started out as an athlete, sort of a long time ago, it was different. It wasn't a subject that was talked about as well, you know, mental health and the mindset. And so it was very much something that, yeah, if you were struggling or there was something wrong, you saw it as a weakness, and oh, I'm not as good an athlete as somebody else because they're managing that better than I am. Right, I need to try and sort this out. And you know, it wasn't that case of seeking help and seeking somebody to support you. So yeah, I would have put a lot on myself as an athlete, but now it's an understanding of there's lots of people out there in different capacities who will be able to help you in different ways, who you can turn to and who can support you. But I think it's definitely an awareness that everybody needs to have. Everybody needs to have a responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And Katrina, you work with the Institute of Sport at Sport Scotland, and you know, what's your perspective on this balance between the individual taking responsibility, but also the support systems which the Institute provides and others?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of general things that we can all do to support our own mental health. There's good sleep, there's good recovery, there's good food, there's having that good support network around you, and so those things are universal in many respects. On the other hand, that kind of individual approach to athletes, so what do they need as individuals to thrive and to handle their mental health and get the best out of themselves, and that does vary. But I think from the support network side of things, it's about how can that support network encourage that athlete to speak out and to say, this is what I need, and for the support network to then be able to signpost that athlete to the people that can help them. As Ailey was saying, you don't always know who's out there, who's doing what. The Institute has a vast range of practitioners who are working in lots of different areas, and part of the great thing about being part of that network as a practitioner myself is being able to refer athletes onto other expertise and other people who can target a specific thing that athlete is saying that they need.
And Barbara, if I come to you, Katrina's talked about that sort of support structure, and you're obviously an athlete yourself, but importantly, you're a sort of senior leader within Springburn Harriers, and you'll see a whole range of young athletes and adult athletes. So how important is that sort of support structure within Springburn Harriers, be it the coaches, be it the other athletes, be it the sort of parents?
I think it's really important. I'm so pleased that we teamed up with Robert and the SAMH team a few years ago to really get to understand the impact that we can have on all of the people within our club. When I started at the club, I was an adult athlete, and I just was thinking about me, and like Lee was saying, like you thought like you were responsible for your own mental health, but now as a parent and the convener, you are trying to look after everybody, and you have to have some structure in place for that. And having the guidelines and help that we've had from SAMH, that's helped us lay down quite a lot of different like policies and procedures, but it's helped us train our young leaders and our coaches to start to listen to the athletes and let them, you know, talk back and like check in with them and see how they're doing. So structure is really important.
And Robert, Barbara's talked about SAMH, and you've got years of experience through SAMH, and you will have seen people who've struggled, but people who've done well through participation in sport. Does it go without saying that everybody responds differently? You know, some people can deal with it as individuals, some people need more of that sort of support structure. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're all unique in our own right. We might have similarities, but I think it does go back to that kind of person-centered approach and looking at the individual and hearing what the individual's telling us that will then help us to respond. So, of course, people come to things differently. Some people have greater resilience, and some people need some support in that space to help them within that. And I think that's why it's really important for us to recognise we can all play our part in athletes' mental health. You know, so across the sporting system, looking at all the different touch points that's there, from club development right through the culture, the environment that is created, that people feel empowered to seek support or get help or know where to go. In SAMH, we did a massive piece of research, and we identified that actually individuals don't know where to go sometimes to get some support. So we have to create spaces and environments, culture, where we are enabling and empowering people to, yes, empower themselves within that space, but also recognise that getting a bit of support at times is a good thing. So I think it's really important for us to consider that.
And on that theme of empowerment, one thing which I think has been a really sort of positive development in recent years is that athletes are much more prepared to talk about mental health issues. So, you know, if we look at like some Matt Hudson-Smith, 400-metre athlete who won bronze medal at the World Championships in 2022, but after that he talked about how he'd actually attempted to commit suicide. He'd struggled with injury and mental health issues. Robert, why do you think athletes are feeling more able to talk about their mental health?
So one of the things that over my career that I've seen, and my CEO, Billy Watson, talks about this a lot, about how we need to break down barriers around stigma and create the right cultures and so forth, that what we have actually seen is people are becoming more aware. So we're building awareness within them. We're helping them to understand the topic more. So people are becoming a lot more vocal. We're seeing clubs like Springburn Harriers who are very openly saying to their young athletes, to their members, their volunteers, to parents, creating spaces where mental health is part of the agenda. They're saying mental health is important. So we're seeing more and more places. And actually, if we look at the World Athletics Indoor Championship, this is the first event in Scotland that has put front and centre mental health and wellbeing as a core value of what it wants to deliver upon. Mm-hmm. Not just about having exciting and celebrated games where we see athletes compete and have great success, but actually that wider issue around mental health and wellbeing. And I think because that is happening across our communities, across championships and so forth, that we're actually seeing people saying, okay, there's a real movement here and we want to be part of it. So people are coming forward and actually saying, I can be more open about it.
Mm-hmm. So Ellie, bringing you in as a former elite athlete, you said it wasn't really something that people spoke about in those days. Did you struggle with your mental health at that elite level? Were you able to talk to anybody about it? What were your sort of coping mechanisms?
Yeah, so again, like Robert touched on, I think it was something that you didn't think you should have. It was a bit of a stigma against it, and you sort of look at elite athletes and you think, well, you know, if they're competing well and doing well, everything's great and everything's perfect. And I didn't really realise anything until I went to the Olympics in 2012. It was my very first Olympic Games, and it was obviously a home Olympics. And I'd been so focused on making that team and making that Games. When I got there, I was just completely and utterly overwhelmed. And it was only when I came away from it, I just thought, something's not right there, something's gone wrong. And it was being in that environment of being surrounded by so many athletes who I saw it being this level, and I saw me being down there, and I thought, I don't know how I've managed to get into this championships. I shouldn't be here, I don't belong. And I must have given something away in an interview after that Games, because a performance psychologist had got in touch with me, and he said, I was reading an article that you were talking about your experience at London, and I just thought, I just wanted to chat to you. And at that point, I was really low. I'd come away from the Olympics, and I thought, wow, I really hated that experience, you know, and all I've ever kind of known is wanting to be an athlete. And why, when I've gone to the biggest competition of my whole life, I've dreamed of being an Olympic athlete, why have I gone there and hated it? So I thought, well, I've nothing to lose. I'm going to speak to this guy and see what happens. And we just chatted and we spoke. And yeah, it was the first time I'd really kind of just thought about what's going on in my head. What am I thinking about? What's going on in my life? And you know, I think I got so pigeonholed into being on a track and performing and being an athlete. I kind of just lost sight of everything else that was going on. And I ended up working with that performance psychologist for my whole career. So it wasn't like it was a eureka moment. Oh, I've worked out what's wrong. I fixed it. That's me. It was a constant thing. I was always learning. I was always, you know, challenging. There was moments when things were great. There was moments when it wasn't so good. And he was kind of, that was just important as my physical training. You know, looking at my mindset, looking at my mental health was just as important as doing a hurdle session or a gym session. You know, it was part of who I was. And I carried that on even after I retired, you know, and brought that into everyday life. So it was something that I probably wouldn't have acknowledged or understood had that person not spotted it before I did. I knew something was wrong. I knew something hadn't gone right, but I didn't know what it was. And I think it's a bit of a sliding doors moment after that Olympic Games, because if he hadn't made that sort of connection to me, that could well have been the last time I ever competed. You know, that could have been me saying, I don't know, I didn't enjoy that. That's not for me, and shut the door on my athletics career. But thankfully, it didn't, and you know, I learned, and I went on to have a really great career after that. So, yeah, that was that kind of moment for me.
And of course, for all athletes, but particularly for elite athletes, there are probably a lot more lows than highs. And did you see other people that you were competing against who were maybe sort of struggling? Were they open about it? Did they talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because probably around about that time of 2012, I trained with an athlete called Jack Green, who was really in a dark place, really struggling. And if you look on Jack Green's LinkedIn page, he shares a lot about his story. And at the time, I looked at him as this young, you know, potential athlete that was going to go on and do great things without realising there was a lot of struggle there. And I think you never really know somebody, you know, and you have this perception, like I said earlier, of you know, athletes in particular, because they're on this kind of pedestal and they go and perform, and you think, they've got no issues, you know, they can go out there and do that. And, you know, there's a lot going on. And you know, he spoke about Matt, and I think it's really important to talk about it, you know, and have these discussions because, it's everybody goes through it, you know, and it's just different ways. And, you know, sometimes people have a bigger stage when they go through it. But it's something that, you know, everybody goes through and everybody doubts and everybody, and I think it's just a really important thing to discuss.
And Katrina, you work with elite athletes like Ailey and across other sports. Presumably you agree that sort of talking about these things is a healthy thing to do. And what other advice would you give to elite athletes to confront these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just talking about it is that first critical step. You know, last week I had a conversation with an athlete who had quite a lot going on, didn't really want to talk to me, if I'm honest. And we just sat down and we had a coffee, and afterwards he sent me an email and was like, I actually found our meeting really helpful just to speak out what was going on inside. And I think that can be the first step. as Ailey was saying, that sliding doors moment of just one person reaching out and saying, are you okay? How are you actually? So I think my advice would be have those people in your network if you can, already existing, have those people who are gonna actively ask you and reach out, particularly at those critical moments post-games. You know, we talk a lot about decompression post-major championships and post-games, making sure that athletes have processed those emotions, understood why they have felt certain ways, as well as looking at their performances. It's actually looking at what it's done to them, how it's changed them as people, because it's a pressure cooker. Those games are like nothing else you'll experience in terms of the atmosphere. I suspect 2012, the crowd was mad, you know, and it's about acknowledging that's not a normal experience, and so we have to talk about it afterwards and treat it and unpick some of it to understand it. So I think my main piece of advice would be having that support system around you of people who are going to check in, who you trust to talk to, and if those people feel they can't help, actually looking a bit further afield for potentially that professional help, whether that's a sports psychologist, performance lifestyle practitioner, you know, clinical psychologist even. It's about finding those right people who can help you take those next steps and move forward through whatever it is that you're experiencing.
And Barbara, if I come to you, because not everybody's at the elite level, you know, for many young athletes, the Forth Valley League or the Grangemouth for the Scottish Championships is their London Olympics. It's that sort of level. So you work with a lot of young people and young athletes. Do you encourage them if they've got issues? I know that I coach a group of young girls in particular, and you know, often if they've got issues, a sort of friendly, sympathetic ear means quite a lot to them. How do you deal with those sort of issues in your club?
Well, interesting, quite close to exactly what Katrina does with her elite athletes, actually. We've been through the Ahead of the Game programme with Sam H, and that is you're trying to get your tribe together, whether it's a small coaching group, so you've got the athletes here, you're asking how they are, they're listening to how they're feeling, you're encouraging them to take action, speak to a trusted person. If they don't want to speak to a coach or somebody in the club, have they got a trusted person to speak to, and then checking in with them and just having that going all the time, because then you're able to escalate that if there are any issues. But it's actually, like, even if you're just talking about like how like 2012 was like, if you're a wee 9-year-old and you're going to Emirates for the first time for an indoor league, if you actually go in there and like you're going to the afternoon match and the morning match is on and it's like the relays at the end, the place is absolutely like it's so scary. So our little ones go through, I'm sure, almost exactly the same as Ailey's gone through. It's just as terrifying for them. So I think even if you're just at club level, you're going through exactly the same as our elite athletes are going through as well. So it's important to recognise that. While you think it's just a club match, it's actually like really big to them. And if they got on the podium, it's like winning the Olympics to them.
So if I stay with you, Barbara, and the sort of role of sports leaders, so really keen to explore, you know, that role that sports leaders can play to foster athlete well-being and to create a positive environment. How do you make sure that the environment for these kids is positive and a happy environment at Springburn?
So we have thought about that quite a lot, because we used to say, yeah, we're very welcoming, but we didn't actually think about how somebody new coming into the club might be. So whether it might be somebody older coming in from the community, just thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be good enough to run with the club. But if I focus on the juniors, if we've got wee ones coming in at 7 years old, again, they're coming into a group that's already there. So what kind of things can we do to make them feel comfortable? So we speak to the parents before, we find out what kind of abilities they are, if they've got any additional support needs, issues. And then we make sure the coach knows the name of the people that are coming on that night. The new ones knew the name of the coach that they're coming to. We've got a welcoming team that get them out of the car and say hello, and then they're taken to their first session. And we buddy them up, and they've got a buddy for the night, and especially for the wee ones, it's a run, jump, throw, games-based sessions. There's always lots of things that they can do. They're making new friends. And we've also got a wee support husky dog. It's not a real dog, it's a stuffed animal called Bernie, because we're Springburn. And especially for the first few nights, we do circle time, so they get to sit down, learn a bit about each other, And then it's always something for the coaches to think about. If there's any issues going on the next time, they might remember something in that conversation. But also if they're having a hard time and needing a wee bit of time out, they get to go and sit with Bernie. And we can replicate that for quite a number of the years where it's kind of like a safe space, sit with the dog until they're able to come back in again. And it's like they've got a wee friend if they're just feeling a bit overwhelmed. So I think it's just thinking about who you've got coming in, what kind of things they might be anxious about, and then just trying to allay those fears with the wee athlete, but also with the parents.
And on the parents, because that fun environment is really important, but often the parents are the sort of worst enemy.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you sort of deal with it?
So the parents are always wanting to hang around, so we just basically say, we'll see at 7 o'clock, you know, we've got it from here, these coaches have done it before, you know, let them be, we'll let you know if there's any issues, but like the parents, I think, it's quite often it's quite hard for them to separate themselves. But it's really important for the athlete to do it because they're taking their first steps to independence, so they don't need their parents around there. They need to do it by themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert, how important do you feel that the role of clubs like Springburn Harriers is to promote sort of mental health and well-being within communities? And could we be doing more as a society to promote that type of participation in club sport to support well-being?
I think it's hugely important. I think Springburn Harriers are an amazing example because of the approach that they take, but also because they are very good at reaching out and asking for support from expertise, whether it's us or others within Scottish athletics or so forth. But it's really important, and I think that is why we've invested as an organisation. So SAMH has a charter called Scotland's Mental Health Charter for Sport and Physical Activity, which is completely aimed at club and community level. And it's about resources that's there that people can sign up for free. The resources are free. And it really gets them to think and be intentional around the culture that they want to create at that club, how they want to connect with people to bring more people in, how to break down barriers, how to build capacity across your volunteers, your coaches and so forth. So it's really, and we've continued to invest in that year in, year out, funded the last 2 years through Scottish Government. But what's really important about that is that we now have over nearly 700 clubs across clubs and organisations across Scotland who have signed up to the Charter and are intentionally looking at what they're doing to break down barriers so that people can engage, participate and achieve at their clubs and organisations. And I think that's just wonderfully exciting for us as an organisation that we're part of that. And the last thing I'd say about that it's been designed by clubs, Springburn Harriers and others, who were brilliant at giving advice and guidance and saying what would work to help us to design tools and resources that are not only meaningful to those clubs, but accessible to those clubs as well.
Yeah. And Ellie, if I come on to you, because obviously you came through the club structure at Petrivi in particular, and I remember watching you coming through, and you had some great coaches there. How important was that phase for you as you sort of developed through to ultimately an elite athlete?
Well, huge, and that was the only reason I did develop that, because that that was my first introduction, and that was the positive introduction to it, because that's what allowed me to stay in the sport and continue that as a career. And it was, I think it's you feel it in your club and your community, and then you feel it as being Scottish as well. And I think that's always something that I took with me whenever I went and travelled around. It was always, you're at the Olympics, you're there as GB, but I'm also there representing Scotland. I'm also there representing Petrivi, I'm also there representing Kinross, the town that I come from, and it's all them as part of your journey to there. And it's like Barbara touched on, it's like if you can have those great positive experiences, then that just builds you on and you stay there. And I came through the pathway reasonably straightforward, from Petrivi right through to the end of my career. And I always wore my club vest at every opportunity I could get, to show that was who I represented and that was who I was part of. And yeah, all the coaches, all the volunteers, all the parent helpers, all the teammates, club mates, they were all part of that journey to allow me to get to where I got to.
Yeah, and so Katrina, we've heard about the importance of that sort of club structure and particularly leaders within the sort of club. So what advice would you give to any sort of sports leader or aspiring sports leader to make sure that it's a positive environment for people?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's maybe not been touched on when we're talking about sports leaders is peers, is having those athlete representatives, and that's something that is definitely building. It's having those athlete voice groups within training groups, within sports, so that athletes feel like they can confidently and confidentially sometimes sort of speak to a peer who can then feed that through to the relevant people at the top. And I think those are often the unsung sporting leaders, is those ones that are actually in the thick of it with you. So I think having a look and a thought for actually how can athlete leaders within this group also help us to be building towards the outcomes that we want, whether that is people feeling welcome, and as you say, Barbara, having a buddy, even that's a sporting leader, even if they're still weak.
Yeah, okay, good. So Elif, if I come to you for this next question, so World Indoor Championships in a couple of weeks, and you're an ambassador for that. How important is it, do you think, that mental health and well-being is playing such a central role in being talked about at these championships?
Yeah, well, me touching on it slightly, I think the fact that it's out there and it's something that's being talked about is huge, because it's now part of it. It's part of what it should be, and it's normal that it's part of this. And I think it's something that we should be proud of, that it's part of our World Championships, and you'll have all the elite athletes there that will all have their own stories, will all have their own experiences, but also you've got all the work that's gone behind it, all the people that have put this championships on, all the volunteers. Everybody needs to be supported and looked after, and that's one of the big things I've realised since being involved in the World Indoors was, as an athlete, I would turn up to an event and be right, well, I need to be completely prepared to go and compete in this event, and be on my A game, and sort of dismissed everything that had to be done to be putting on this event. And now being part of it, I've seen how much work and effort goes into just being able to put an event on. And I think it's really great that we've got that out there, and not just for elite athletes that are coming to perform, but for everybody that's part of it, for everybody that's there watching, to see that, it's normality now to be discussing your mental health, be discussing well-being, supporting each other. It's something that I'm really proud to be part of now. And like I say, it's everybody that's involved in that needs that support as well.
And Robert, presumably you'd agree with that. SAMH is the sort of charity partner for the World Indoor Championships, and sort of physical health and mental health are often sort of inextricably linked. So presumably you would celebrate the fact that, mental health issues are, at the front of something like the World Indoor Championships, and should be at the front of any big major event.
Yeah, in a very meaningful way, because I think that's the point. The championships, through the team that's behind that, have been hugely supportive. We've got Stuart Campbell here, who's the director of the championships, and who right from the outset recognised the importance of mental health, was front and centre coming forward and saying, what can we do? How can we do this? How can we build within this space? And in a really meaningful way. So I'm absolutely delighted, because, and actually I'm going to give another shout out to our CEO, Billy Watson, who's in the audience. Billy, 14 years ago, put front and centre that sport and physical activity can play a huge part in our mental health and wellbeing, and was championing that. We've been doing it for that long. We are now at this stage, 14 years later, where we have a major sporting event happening in Scotland, happening in Glasgow, my home city, where mental health is front and centre. And that's just something really special that we really need to celebrate. But I said it's about a meaningful way. So we're building capacity across volunteers, the WAIC team that's behind this as well. There's resources and tools that has been specifically designed to engage the public, to get them connected to these messages, to see that a sporting event is playing its part within that space. Not this weekend, but next weekend, on the Saturday and Sunday, you will see the big SAMH Wellbeing bus that is going to be there. You'll see activities happening in partnership with Jog Scotland and Scottish Athletics, where members of the public can come and engage, and they can get advice and guidance around their mental health. All is happening in line with the championships, in line with the city activation that's happening across our great city. So it's wonderful to see that. So it's not just here's a message that we support mental health. It's actually saying we are being intentional, and it has been a real partnership. And I think, and I hope others that when they see this, will be able to see, wait a minute, this is so important to us. Mm-hmm. We all have mental health, we all have physical health, and actually recognising that they're both together and we can play our part in it, I think is really, really important.
And Katrina, coming on to you, because this for many of the elite athletes participating, this is probably one of the most stressful things they can be doing, getting themselves onto the line, injury-free and sort of competing. Presumably, you celebrate the fact that we can talk about these things, and would you welcome some of these athletes talking about their own sort of struggles at these?
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about role models, there's that rhetoric of if you don't see it, you can't be it. And although we wouldn't want to wish sort of poor mental health or mental health struggles on younger athletes at all, actually, if they see their idols, they see the people that they love cheering on, they love watching on TV, they love following their careers. If younger athletes are seeing those people, those few stages up the journey, speaking openly about their mental health, it means that they're more likely to speak openly about their mental health. And I think if we can just perpetuate that culture of openness, of honesty, of this isn't something to be ashamed of, when we speak about our mental health, that's a positive thing. It enables us to get help, and it enables us to perform ultimately. We talk about a lot in performance lifestyle, how can we reduce the volume of distractions that are going on so that an athlete can go out and perform. And one of those is acknowledging what is that athlete's mental health state. And actually, in some cases, there have been high-profile cases where athletes have said, actually, it's not right for me to go out and compete because of my mental health. And that's a really, people say, well, that's a really brave thing to do, but that should be normal, that actually, if you weren't physically ready to go and compete because you were carrying an injury, you wouldn't. And same goes for mental health. If you're not mentally ready to go and compete, and for that not to be a harmful thing for your mind or body, then you shouldn't be competing. So I think the more that we see those athletes going out to World Championships and talking about their mental health and the journey that they've been on, the better.
Yeah. And Barbara, Springburn Harriers is just along the road, literally from the Emirates Arena, and presumably you'd want to see some sort of impact. You'll have lots of young athletes within the club who'll be, watching the TV, watching these athletes, watching these role models that Katrina's just described. What sort of impact would you hope to see from the world indoors?
We've got impact like several areas. We've got some of our older, younger athletes will be kit carriers. We've got a number of coaches and volunteers within the club are going to be volunteering at the indoors. We've got people within the club that work with Scottish Athletics that will be doing various roles in it. But just having the event in the city and going somewhere where we have trained ourselves, it's going to be so exciting the next time we go there. So it's going to be the under-12s 2 weekends after that, the under-12s competition. Yep. So they're going to be on the track where their heroes have been. They're going to be jumping in the long jump pit where their heroes have been. I think it's so exciting to have something in the city and it's accessible to all the clubs. So it's amazing that we have the facility here and we've all got easy access to it.
Yeah, and Barbara, if I stick with you and we know that participation in sport within communities and the social aspect round about that can have a huge positive impact on mental health and well-being. But within the community, what barriers do you see to participation, and how do you think those barriers can be overcome?
We have been looking at that quite a lot recently, actually. So we're looking at maybe there's monetary barriers, there might be language barriers, transport access barriers. But actually just the perception, we're called Springburn Harriers. We did change our name to Springburn Harriers and Athletics Club. But if you see Springburn Harriers, then it's like, oh, they're going to be far too fast. We're not going to join that club there. So we've tried to do some work within the community. We've had menopause-friendly sessions. We're a menopause-friendly club now. We've got Couch to 5K. So we're trying to do various things within the community to try and break down those barriers, but we do understand you need to go into the community to try and do that. You can advertise the club as much as you like, but if people have perceived barriers and you don't actually know what they are, they'll never come to you in the first place. So it's actually working with Scottish Athletics with the new community impact and inclusion. So working with them to see, well, what can we do within the community to get people doing any kind of activity. I don't mind if they don't go to athletics, if they choose to do something else instead. Just very passionate about getting youngsters and for any age getting involved in physical activity because their mental health will improve from that, undoubtedly.
And Robert, how can clubs and local organisations within communities work with SAMH to promote mental health and well-being?
As I said earlier, one of the things that I think clubs can do really easily is sign up to Scotland's Mental Health Charter for sport and physical activity. They'll get a resource pack that will help them within that particular space and enable them to look at what are these barriers. The other thing that I think is really important is that we continue to share the different experiences, Springburn Harriers' experience, and making sure that we share that experience with other clubs that they can learn. Scottish Athletics can play a huge part in getting those stories out as well, so that clubs can feel that these things are accessible. It's really important, however, that clubs really do ask these kind of questions of themselves. You know, how do you break down barriers? What are the barriers? You know, how can we learn more about that? And I think it's as Barbara says, you have to reach out to help people to reach in, not the other way around. So being out there and listening to your community, hearing what your community's needs are ways that clubs can really take hold and really hear what people are saying that then will help within their practices.
Yeah. Now, Ellie, I'm going to come back to you because you had a long career as an elite athlete, but then obviously you've now retired. How did you find retiring, and did that have an impact on you?
Yeah, it did, and I kept myself as one of the lucky ones with my retirement as well, because I got to choose my retirement. A lot of athletes, they don't sometimes, you know, they either have to retire through injury or, you know, or because they can't do it, you know, financially, or they get cut from funding. So I was really lucky in terms of I got to say, you know, that's me, I'm done, and I got a nice transition out of the sport as well, because I didn't retire straight away. My last race was actually the Emirates of the Europeans in 2019, but I was pregnant after that, and then I was going to come back for Tokyo, and then COVID hit, so I had another year sort of, you know, still trying to train. So I had about 2 years kind of deciding to retire, which, you know, not a lot of athletes get that opportunity, but it was still an adjustment, you know, because you're so used to doing what you do. And I retired at the age of 35. So a lot of people say, oh, that must be great to be able to retire at 35, but well, no, I need to then go and get another career, you know, and going into a new career at the age of 35 is very difficult, you know, and you know, you become very vulnerable again, and, you know, you have to really understand, what skills do I have? What have I learned? You know, I can run around a track pretty well, but what else can I do? So I had to really look and understand, right, what have I learned? What values do I have? And how can I use that going forward? So it's quite difficult, you know, that to understand. But again, I'd put in those, I had that toolkit from my career, from, you know, working with my performance psychologist as well, to understand who I was. And, you know, throughout my career, I understood that I wasn't just Ailey the athlete, I was Ailey the person. I had lots of other aspects to who I am, and I think that was really crucial as well to when I retire. And I do sometimes look at other athletes and think, yeah, you need to think about that, because I think as an athlete it's quite difficult as well, because you're in this sort of bubble competing, and you don't want to mention life after sport, because you think, oh, if I mention that, you know, coaches might think I'm not fully into my sport, or they might not pick me because they think, oh, she's thinking about other things. But really it's crucial, you know, and being able to sort of have that balance of your sport, of your things outside, having plans for when you do retire, just makes everything so much easier. And I think that probably needs a little bit of work as well from, you know, and it's like change to people's opinions on that, to say, yeah, it's okay to be thinking about life after sport. Doesn't mean you're going to be stopping or any less committed to your sport, but it's really important, because, you know, some people won't be as lucky as me that their sport gets taken away from them very quickly. And that can have a real detriment on your mental health, because all of a sudden that thing that you were striving for, you can't do anymore. And likewise as well, sometimes when you're really successful, and you'll have seen this, some athletes put all this on this one achievement, so they think, right, my whole goal is to be Olympic champion. Once I'm Olympic champion, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to have made it. And really, you as a person, nothing really changes when you win that. Yes, okay, there might be opportunities, but actually it's understanding who you are as a person. And so I think a lot of people think that will fix everything. But, it doesn't, so I'm maybe going to put a tangent there. But yeah, I think there's a lot to it, and there's lots that I think we can improve on to help transitioning, dual careers, and just kind of life after sport.
And Katrina, you must have a perspective on this, because you'll have worked with a lot of athletes who've had to sort of develop that mental resilience through their career. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to an end, they kind of lose their purpose. What advice would you give to athletes in that transition?
Yeah, so what Ailey was saying there about, who am I? Have I got other things going on outside of sport? Am I preparing for my sporting retirement? That's the bread and butter of my job. And actually, to be honest, that's one of the things I enjoy most about it is you sit in a room with a person and yes, they're an amazing athlete. Some of them are Olympians, Paralympians, etc. But you're also sitting there with a person, and it's about getting to know that person, not necessarily them as an athlete. And that's the best thing about my job, is that I don't need to be an expert on every sport. I can just sit there and get to know people and get them to tell me about who they are and encourage them to grow as people and to explore other avenues of personal development and other interests that they've got. And all of that kind of just in the background, like polishing almost or pulling through of who they are, that benefits them in the long term when their time comes to leave sport, either through choice or not. They feel confident that they know what they're looking for as a career. They've maybe done a bit of work experience. They know what their values are. They know who they are, so that their full identity is not tied up in their athletic identity. So that we're basically trying to prevent them running off a cliff. So when that sport stops underneath them, we don't want them to just drop off the edge. So how can we kind of build that up, build other aspects of themselves and of their life, so that they've got other things going on. And that may be through injury as well. If you're off the track for injury, actually what else are they doing to keep themselves busy and engaged, and how are they using that time to come back better and as a more well-rounded person?
Good, thank you. Now we are about to open up for questions in a minute or two, but I'm going to fire one final question to everybody before we do, if that's okay. So, series of panel discussions today is called Removing Hurdles. So in the spirit of removing hurdles, I'd like each of you to tell me what the one thing you would like to see happen to improve well-being in sport in 2024. And Barbara, I'm going to start with you.
I think the athletes talking about their mental health, I think that would make a huge difference to athletes in our club, just to hear that, like, their heroes struggle a bit. Yeah.
Robert?
I would really like to see, I'd really like to see physical activity in sport seen as a health outcome, so that it has policy and strategy behind it. We've got the mental health strategy that came out in Scotland recently, and whilst it mentions physical activity sport, I think it doesn't go far enough. So I want to see that, because if we've got it from that, it will then help these other areas as well.
And do you think that's something that's just dropped off the policymakers' agenda more generally?
Sport and physical activity has such an influence across our mental, physical and social health. I don't think it's dropped. What I think it is there, but we need to see better commitment from across our political system that will really raise it up. Because we've got amazing examples that's showing that it's beyond just participating in sport and physical activity.
Yeah, very good. Katrina?
I think it's reducing the stigma or the barriers that come with speaking out about your mental health. So very similar to Barbara, I would love to see athletes feeling really confident that they can share more widely what's going on inside and work through that to reach their potential.
Thank you. And finally, Ailey.
Yeah, mine's kind of stealing a little bit from everybody. I think I'd like to see mental health and wellbeing valued as important as medals at championships. You know, when they talk about how important winning medals are, and I'd like that to be on par with mental health for not just for athletes, for everybody that's involved in sport.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. So Lucy, we're going to open up for questions.
Do we have any questions?
It's on, right, it's on. Right. This is a bit of a niche question from a personal point of view. How would you deal with someone who appears to have all the physical and technical attributes, but they don't have any aspiration to go on the performance pathway?
Well, Barbara, I think you should.
As a coach, that's quite frustrating actually, because I coach as well. I guess you just have to stick with it, and then like everything we do is athlete centred, so even if they have all the attributes, if they don't want to compete, then that's just the way we have to go until they find such times or some inspiration that they decide they want to change their mind. But it has to be athlete centred, so can't make anybody do something that they don't want to do. I don't think we should. We should respect what they're wanting to do.
So you say they can't compete, but somebody can still compete, but choose not to go down that performance. I'm talking about my own personal situation where I've a lot of my sporting friends think it's insane, but I've had 2 opportunities to be in performance programs, but chose not to because although I had the physical attributes, I didn't think mentally I would cope with it. I wouldn't want to be in that pressure situation. And the same kind of extension of something that you've talked about already is for people who do go on the performance pathway. You've talked about at the end of it how you deal with them and trying to kind of decompress them, if you like, at the end of it. But what about the people that don't get to the top, that don't have the medals and all those other things? They go on the pathway, but they get dropped off it before they get to that elite level. How is there something done for them, or are they just, oh, sorry, you're not good enough, you just move to the side?
Yeah, so you know, if somebody comes into a performance pathway and for instance has support from Scottish Institute of Sport, we give athletes a year of sort of transition support. So I know Ailey said her transition was about 2 years, and the UK Sports Institute do something slightly different, that they have a slightly longer window, but it's not a cut-off of performance lifestyle support. We recognise that as practitioners in this particular area, athletes need a little bit more time to make that transition. So although, you know, if you were dropped or decided to leave a performance programme, you might then cease to be able to access your physiotherapy or your sports psychology, that actually there's a slightly longer window to allow athletes to kind of have a slightly more gentle exit from
I'm
from
thinking that currently my sport just now is curling. So there might be a pathway, there might be a programme of 10 or 12 athletes, but only 5 are being selected. Mm-hmm. So the other people, they go through all the training programme, they get all the support, but sorry, you're never going to make the final cut, so you move aside. So is there provision for looking after the mental well-being of people who don't make that final cut?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there definitely should be provision for that. And I think the systems are trying to catch up. So there are more and more performance lifestyle practitioners being put into the space in order to try and meet that need. But there are certainly examples in the past of where it's not been done well. You know, there are some horror stories that come out of places like football academies where young people have just been told, right, that's it, you're not going to make it. And it's 0.01% who actually do make it to Premier League or wherever. And the support isn't there. So that's definitely an area that needs to be looked at, and those people need to be acknowledged and given the support that they need to make that transition successfully. So it's helping their mental health rather than harming it.
There's a couple of points I want to pick up in what you said. I completely agree with Barbara that often it can be a particular choice, and we need to respect someone's choice in that space. But it's something that you said there that was particularly important to me, and it's about what were maybe some of the barriers that was helping and supporting you into that next space? Am I mentally fit, using your language, to be in that space? And I think we have to recognise that, can we support someone who has the skill, has the talent, but might not have the confidence or be concerned? And can we put supports around that individual that might help them into that space, and for it not to be the barrier that stops them from achieving particular areas? On your other point about the kind of pathway thing, I think it's something that Katrina and the rest of us spoke about. It's not just about the end, it's about the journey. So when young athletes are coming through a pathway, we need to be speaking, and Katrina spoke about this, how do we stop athletes, whatever sport it is, falling off at the end, right? So that when their journey's coming and that journey's taking a particular pathway, that the culture started from the beginning, not when suddenly, we now need to respond to a particular situation. I think we need to do more than that. I think there are lots of things that we can learn. I think the Institute's got some fantastic work that they've been doing in that space. I think Katrina's representing that here today. But I think we can do more, and I think we can learn from the experience of others that will help all of us. So again, back to the very first question about athletes and who's responsible, we all are. So let us all look and say, what part can we play in that journey that's going to make it a success for that individual, whatever the direction of travel is.
I think there's no getting away from the fact that these programmes are funded and they're looking for a return, i.e. medals at the end of it. So it's, you can have a rose-tinted idea of looking after everybody, but I know everybody in the system is under major pressure to return medals. And it's difficult to marry the two things together. The looking after people and achieving at the same time. It's a really difficult process.
But again, I would say there, because I agree with the point, but I think it also comes down to the fact that we have athletes that are speaking out. Yeah. We have young people that are also speaking out at different things, people that are being listened to. So actually, we are on a great opportunity to actually change systems. And it's questions like the one that you've just given us that allows us to raise awareness of that and start to create a space where we talk about it. David is the chair of Scottish Athletics, and I know for David, being at Scottish Athletics, these are the things that are discussed. And actually, we can look at these things and say, right, what are we doing well, and where else do we need to go? Where are the gaps, and what else can we add into it?
And I think it's incumbent, there's a duty of care, really, on governing bodies to make sure that people are looked after. One of the things I see so often is these pathways are just far too narrow, at far too early an age. Now, Ailey's got experience of UKA level, so the world class level. But as young athletes are coming through pathways, I think they should be broader rather than narrower. And as you say, there should be support at every single stage in the pathway. Nobody should be saying you're not good enough. People should be encouraged to go through the pathway. And I don't know if you've got any reflections on your experience with UKA.
A couple of points as well. So going to your original point, my sister is older than me, was better than I was, but she hated competing. And every time she would go and race, she would be sick before she raced because she was far too nervous, but had all the tools to actually go and have a career, whereas I enjoyed competing. And I kind of look at her and think, if there was a toolkit that you had there to understand what you were going through, would you have progressed and had a career like I did? I think we're quite fortunate in Scotland, going through the UKA, the UK Athletics, UK Sport pathway. You have your targets that you have to make. If you don't make them, then you get cut from funding. Scotland has a bit of a safety net for those athletes. So in Scottish Athletics in particular, if we get dropped from UK funding, we are then supported by the Institute, by Scottish Athletics. English athletes didn't have that, and there was a lot of English athletes that, once they were cut, that was them. It was like a lot of them had to go and find jobs, ended up either leaving the sport or trying to balance working full-time with an athletics career that just didn't work. So I think we're quite fortunate that we have quite a good system here where there's a safety net there that supports you. And likewise, there's a safety net there if you are coming out of your sport. If you've got an injury that's career changing, there's support there to carry it through. like I said earlier, I think that it needs to be more probably from I don't know where it would come from, but that sort of understanding of the medals. Because as an athlete, I got it. I understood, right, you have to win medals because that's what looks good, and that's what, you know, if athletics have every time we go to a championships, there's a medal target that we have to make. And it doesn't matter what you say to athletes. Athletes want to win medals, you know, it doesn't matter if there's a target, you know, it's not going to change the way we go and approach our competition. But I think, like I say, there needs to be a different way of valuing performance, valuing our athletes without it being, well, if you hit that many medals, that means you're a good sport. Because it doesn't actually work. It hasn't, you know. I remember in Beijing, I think it was swimming did brilliantly in Beijing, so got their funding boosted. And then in London, they did awful. So then they got it all cut. And then, you know, and it's like, well, that's not made a difference. So there has to be an understanding there, but I don't really know how you change that. And that's probably a totally different, you know, topic. But yeah, I think it's about understanding. I understood as an athlete that medals mattered, but they mattered to the other people. What mattered to me was enjoying what I did, loving what I do, and actually doing that brought medals, you know, so.
Yep. One more question here? No, not got time.
Hopefully we'll have a bit of time just for some questions outside. Sorry, we just need to wrap up a little bit now. So
okay, so all that remains is to say thank you to the panellists. Thank you.
Why should we invest in Earth?
It's our life energy and it's our greatest source of excitement and beauty.
Earth to me is important because it's our one and only home.
Because we are destroying the world and we live here all together, and it's not good if we wash or make it even worse, so we need to take care of it.
Earth means like home to me, and just like we take care of our family, I think we should take care of our Earth.
To protect our Earth, we must invest in it. Let's work together to heal our planet now.
We're all on this Earth together, so we're all in this together.
So when you have a roof on your head, you always want to make sure you're safe and protected, and that's what Earth is doing to us, and we also deserve to be doing the same thing for her.
So we should protect it for future generations of people, animals and plants.
As athletes, we know that small steps and consistency can lead to great results.
We know we're not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, but that means we need to push even more for change now.
La giornata della Terra è l'opportunità per riflettere su quanto le nostre scelte sostenibili siano migliorate nel corso dell'ultimo anno o quanto ci siamo avvicinati a questa prospettiva.
We should be setting goals, building consistency, and working for small improvements, and we should be willing to make the investment.
We often think we cannot change anything, but if everyone can just change a small thing, it will create a big picture.
Us athletes travel a lot, and of course this is necessary, but this also leaves a huge carbon footprint. Luckily, there's also things we can do to invest in our planet.
I invest in our planet by reducing my meat consumption in my daily life.
I invest in our planet by looking after my consumer behavior.
And what we all can do is to use our social network to also impact others to invest in our planet.
Cambiare abitudini può essere faticoso. E spesso è proprio il contesto in cui viviamo a rendere tutto più difficile, ma è necessario per ottenere un miglioramento.
In Europe we have great train logistics. Please use it. Fly less. It's good for you, it's good for your wallet, and it's good for the planet.
Uno de los errores más grandes es no hacer nada porque pensamos que podemos hacer solo un poco. Pero al igual que en el deporte, cada pequeño esfuerzo vale. La protección de la vitalidad, la diversidad y la belleza de la naturaleza debe ser un objetivo para toda nuestra comunidad atlética. Vos también podés ser parte del cambio.
Ezért a 2023-as Budapesti Atlétikai Világbajnokság nagyköveteként külön öröm számomra, hogy a szervezésben fontos szerepet kap a fenntarthatóság, és azt, hogy a sport erejével üzenjük a világnak, igenis fontos a jövőnk és a bolygónk egészsége.
The latest IPCC report shows how urgent the situation is, so let's act like it.
We have the power to make a positive impact on the planet. And it's time to act now, before it's too late.
Lo que hacemos marca la diferencia y tenemos que decidir qué tipo de diferencia queremos hacer.
The future and the planet is in our hands, and we need to make a difference.
It's never too late to get out there and start fighting climate change, so
lace up your shoes, go for a run, and help out the planet.
Let's work together to heal the planet now. Yeah!
Thank you everyone for joining us for this Athletes for a Better World panel this evening. We're going to have a great conversation, I think, with athletes and industry voices on raising awareness about the effects of environmental change on sport. So just to begin, I'll introduce our esteemed panel for tonight. Athletics for years, I think he said 20 years the other day. Ele might correct me with that with a smile. Previous long history in communications and involved in the athletics sport, and in the last few years has taken on the sustainability role within World Athletics, really pushing that agenda within the International Federation, and creating the Athletics for a Better World standard, which is something the indoor championships this year are striving for and are taking seriously. So welcome Bob. We've also got with us Lou Blaustein. Lou is based in New Jersey and is the editor-in-chief of Green Sports Blog, which has offered news and commentary about the intersection of the environment and sport since 2013. In doing so, he's interviewed many environmentally active athletes who are not yet speaking out on climate change and other environmental issues. So seeing that need, he wanted to make sure that athletes, who are often and can be some of the most influential humans and voices on the planet, would not remain on the sidelines in this really important and crucial issue. So Lou launched Eco Athletes as a non-profit in 2020 to inspire and coach athletes to lead on climate action. And that's grown and evolved over the last few years to a global roster of over 140 athletes who are now Eco Athlete champions, which is amazing. So thank you, Lou, for joining us today. And to our athletes, Eliza McCartney is a New Zealand pole vault champion and Olympian. As well as being a pole vaulter, Eliza has a passion for environmental sustainability. She has a BSc, majoring in environmental science, and advocates for sustainability in roles such as the World Athletics Champions for a Better World. She's also won a bronze medal in the 2016 Rio Olympic Games, has a personal best of 4.94 metres, which is New Zealand and Oceania record, as well as the 6th highest jump of all time. So some impressive stuff in there. Thanks, Eliza, for joining us. And last but by no means least, we've got Sam Mattis, who is a US discus thrower and Olympian. I've got the cool fact here that he found discus after tripping over a hurdle in 8th grade, which I think there's a fun story in there we might be able to get into later in the panel session, so we might circle back to that one. But after graduating from University of Pennsylvania, he turned down a job offer from Wall Street to pursue his athletics dreams, and since then has become national champion, world championship finalist, and Olympic finalist, and is continuing to train, like Eliza, for the Paris 2024 Olympics. And like Eliza, Sam is also a World Athletics Champion for a Better World, an Eco-Athlete Champion, and hopes to pursue an impactful career in sustainability once he retires from sport. So, wow, what a panel we have! Panel we have for this evening. I'm looking forward to this one. And throughout the conversation tonight, we'll look at we'll try and dig into the why this conversation is so important about raising awareness around environmental issues, not just climate change, but environmental issues more broadly in sport. We'll reflect a bit on the role of the athlete and try and dig into some of Sam and Eliza's perspectives, particularly in that space. And then we'll look at some collaboration pieces. How can we collaborate in this space better, more? How can we build on some of the good work that's happening already? So lots to dig into. So which takes me to my kind of first opening question, which is that I'll put to each of the panel members, if that's okay, is how are you guys already seeing and experiencing a changing climate, as well as other environmental issues affecting sport? I'll perhaps pass to Eliza first, and then we'll go from there. So Eliza, just how are you already seeing and experiencing these issues in kind of real time in your world? I've got the sound.
Climate changes, obviously. We're an outdoor sport most of the time, and extreme weather, whether that's heat waves, whether that's storms, flooding, that really has an effect on athletics. And just last year, actually, during our outdoor season, I had at least one competition cancelled outright because of flooding and severe weather, and we couldn't even get there, let alone think about competing. So I think the frequency of these events, we know they're increasing, right? And that's just going to have more and a more frequent impact on our sport, training and competition. And then more specifically in pole vault as well. I mean, we can't safely compete in high winds, in thunder and lightning. If the storm frequency is increasing, that's going to affect us quite a lot. And then even just to the grip that I use on my pole, it's a sticky grip, lots of vaulters use it, and that kind of breaks down in the humidity and heat and becomes a bit slippery, which is kind of the opposite of what you want. So there's all sorts of things that obviously start to impact on athletics quite strongly, and that I have experienced myself, and unfortunately we're going to keep seeing this for the time being until we start to, improve things.
Amazing. Yeah, and it's really impactful actually to hear the personal stories there, even down to the detail of the grip is fascinating. And Sam, to you, are you seeing similar type of impacts in your daily and competition life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think climate change is something, especially in terms of how it's affecting us. The increased heat is something that I live in Pennsylvania, so East Coast of the United States, and the increased extreme heat related events have been just really hard to train through. Track is a sport that you basically train year round. Maybe you have like a 2-week break in the fall, but we basically no longer have a spring in Pennsylvania. We might have 2 to 3 weeks where it's somewhat of spring type weather, and then it's 90, 95 degrees for like 5 months straight. And super humid, really hard to train in. Last year, we had the smoke blowing down from the Canadian wildfires, so I was dealing with, terrible air quality, having to wear a mask at practice when it's already 90, 95, 100 degrees outside, just making it hard to breathe. And then I think a good example of it making competition is harder in 2021 for our Olympic trials. There was a massive heat wave on the West Coast in Oregon, which is where the Olympic trials were. They saw 116 degrees, I think it was, which is unprecedented for that area. It usually never gets above like 80, 85. The track temperature was like 140 degrees, so they had to postpone a couple events. So it's just something that makes everything more difficult and takes away from what should just kind of be the joy of sport for both fans and the athletes.
No, thank you. And I think it's an interesting point you make there about it detracting from the joy of sport, because often I think I always try and describe it as the bi-directional relationship between sport and the environment. On the one hand, you've got kind of sport being played in the environment, and sport almost relying on a healthy and stable environment in a healthy environment in order to sort of, whether you're performing at the top level and wanting to perform at your absolute peak and your absolute best, or whether it's grassroots clubs dealing with waterlogged pitches or whatever is being dealt with there. So I think there's almost that element of sometimes we take the environment for granted in sport, and actually we're now not being able to do that as much because of these impacting extremes in weather, in air pollution, in lots of different factors. So fascinating insights. And Lou, I know you obviously talk to a lot of athletes across a lot of different sports as well. Are you seeing similar trends outside of athletics as well?
Oh my goodness, yes. And just to amplify on what Sam was saying, being in the New York City area, when we last June when we had that day when the ash from the wildfires up in Canada came down and descended upon us and made the sky orange over New York City. We had an outing that day, Eco Athletes did, to meet up with Nafisa Collier, who plays basketball, which is an indoor sport, at for the WNBA's Minnesota Lynx. They were playing the New York Liberty in Brooklyn, and the game was canceled, not because they were concerned about indoor air pollution, but the air was so bad that they didn't want the fans to travel to the game. And in fact, they postponed that game before the Yankees baseball game, which was outside, was postponed. They postponed that a little while later. I mean, we've been seeing it in really where it started was with the snow sports. And there's an organization that I'm sure our listeners and watchers or viewers are familiar with, which is Protect Our Winters. They've been around for, I think, 14 years now. And, you know, the snow sports athletes, skiers, snowboarders, which are their heritage, you know, they're the canaries in the coal mine. They're seeing the snow recede, and their outdoor seasons are their sports seasons are literally being curtailed within the span of a career. We're also seeing ice hockey. The National Hockey League was probably the first professional league in North America, if not the world, to really get in on a sustainability, to have a sustainability program. Why? Even though the NHL plays indoors, except for a few outdoor games, just for fun, the heritage of the sport is played outdoors on frozen ponds in places like Saskatchewan and Minnesota or whatever. The pond hockey also that season is being curtailed by climate change. So we've been seeing it for quite some time.
Yeah, I think it's really, like you say, pervading across all of athletes and sports at all levels. And I suppose, Bob, from your your international federation hat on, how are you looking at that from an international federation perspective in terms of, I don't know, whether it's scheduling or thinking about some of these environmental challenges for athletes when thinking about your events, looking at your events, and ultimately, so I guess supporting your athletes in some of these areas.
Well, yeah, I mean, so much has already been touched upon, but just to briefly continue on Lou's point about snow sports, I work with colleagues in the International Biathlon Union, and they're beginning to store snow year round. I mean, this is almost bordering, on the surreal when you see these buildings that are being built simply to store snow, to ensure that they'll have snow in the early competitions the following year. That's not an issue that we have to deal with, but we are seriously dealing with heat issues. Scheduling is becoming increasingly a problem. Most of our recent World Championships, we've had to move events around simply because it's too hot. It's usually in the early rounds of the endurance events, for instance. Most recently, our World Championships in Budapest last August, we had to shuffle some events around. And that becomes a problem as you're progressing over the course of a week, because you can't run out of time eventually to actually put on events. We had to, there was a heat wave that part of August in Budapest as well. So it was a mass race component that people were really looking forward to, right? You really want to involve the community in these events, and that number had to be cut back. For safety reasons, the length of the race from a 10K had to be reduced to a 6K to ensure as safe conditions as possible. We're seeing that. Tokyo Olympics were another really big example. Everyone was worried about the heat in Tokyo in August. They decided a few months ahead of time to move the marathons almost 1,000 kilometers away to Sapporo, where it was supposedly going to be cooler. Even there, they had to change the start time of the women's marathon, for instance, because it was already too hot when it was scheduled for. So it's not just us, it's also the Olympic Games, it's other major marathons. We really have to start looking at safer periods for endurance events especially. And then just one more point, when both Seb and Eliza brought up really good points about training. And there was some research done recently with endurance athletes in Kenya. And this is in high altitude areas where they train, right? So there are some cooler temperatures already. But what they're seeing there is because of the heat, they generally go out for 2 runs, right? You have a long run in the morning, you have a long run in the afternoon. What longtime coaches are seeing now is that athletes have to start their first run sooner when it's a little bit cooler in the day. They have to do their late run later in the day, and they're not getting as adequate sleep in between because it's simply too hot to get the proper sort of rest. And I'm sure I see Eliza nodding, so I think she's experienced some of these things as well. So that's becoming increasingly important. We're seriously looking forward. We seriously are considering moving, like some of at least our endurance events, out of our major championship to a different time of year, for starters.
Scheduling point of view, and I guess from each of your answers there's this sort of adaptation piece coming through in terms of how, from each of your perspectives, whether that's an athlete perspective, whether that's from a competition training, whether it's from the different sports or as an international federation, you're having to now actively on a quite a regular basis adapt to these new challenges, not just the challenges of competition and the challenges of pressure and everything that goes around that, but actually the challenge of the environment, and what you think you're going to face might be different, or it might be unexpected, or you're having to train later, train earlier, all these different things. So adaptation is suddenly becoming, I guess, a key part of most of your thinking and to your planning to a certain extent. So it's fascinating to hear, and I think there's a pretty compelling case there as to why sport, looking at the environment and looking at environmental sustainability is so important. So I guess just to flip that in terms of that bi-directional relationship on, so that's kind of, we've sort of covered the ground of environment impacting sport. I guess the other side to that is sport impacting the environment. So hosting events, athletes traveling around the world, putting on these spectacles that engage so many people, offer so much social value, so much excitement, livelihoods, jobs, etc. But comes with an environmental cost to a certain extent. And I suppose my next question is, what is the role sport can play, or sports events and sports organisations? What is the role sport can play? And I guess from an athlete perspective, what do you want to see more of from sports organisations or events organisers that you're competing at? What would you like to see more of, Sam, from your perspective?
Yeah, you think everybody here would want to see sports just run 100% sustainably, and that's something that's incredibly difficult to do for sports, especially given the travel component, and you have to create a stadium site, and there are environmental costs with just about everything that goes into sport, and a lot of those aren't as straightforward as some other industries and areas. So I think it's trying to figure out how to tackle those problems, because if sport can do it, then most other sectors should be able to do it. And we obviously want to be part of that because we want to continue to have these sporting events. And, I'd like to have a career where I'm not at risk of heat stroke for half of the year. But also, on top of that, I think sports has a really unique ability to inspire people across political differences and geographical differences. So I think it's those two pieces of the reach that sport has, and its ability to lead in a lot of different ways and be creative when it comes to imagining a more sustainable way to do these events.
Brilliant. I think that word creativity is a really crucial one in terms of thinking differently. Eliza, have you got anything kind of you'd like to add to that in terms of, as an athlete, what you'd like to see more from sports or sports events?
Yeah, I mean, Sam summed it up really well. That is the kind of core of a lot of what I think as well. I mean, there's kind of two aspects to it. I think there's the meets and the organisations like World Athletics, but there's also the individual athletes, and both have a lot of power of influence. And of course, I'm sure Bob will mention about the Better World Standard for athletics events these days. I mean, that's an amazing step forward to ensure that meets are stepping up to this challenge. So that part's really significant. But also from an athlete perspective, I think as athletes, we are role models. We have huge influence. A lot of individual athletes have huge followings, lots of fans, and the ability to advertise all sorts of things, right? And so I'd also like to see more athletes taking that responsibility really strongly and taking pride in the fact that they are a role model and they can really choose what they're influencing. And that's, could be as simple as some of the lifestyle things that they do, but also probably broader, the partners that they work with, the products that they're choosing to advertise on their platform, all of those sorts of things I'd really love to see a lot more of. And also just inspiration from other sports that are doing some great things in this space. I know that Sail GP have this really cool concept of like a podium for the planet where it runs alongside their sporting podium. They also award first, second, third, I think it is, for the teams that have the most environmental impact, which is really in a positive way, which is really cool. So there's a lot of ways. Again, what Sam said, creativity is a big part of it. It's about working out how we can evolve our industry to be thriving in a much lower carbon economy and society as soon as possible, essentially.
Bob, we will come back to the Athletics for a Better World standard shortly, but that's just a nice segue answer into the kind of topic of the role of the athlete in this space. And as you alluded to, Eliza, there are more athletes such as yourselves speaking out into this space, and you've got the Champions for a Better World roster, you've got the Eco Athletes roster. There are more athletes clearly passionate about and clearly wanting to step up and make their voices heard in this space, which is amazing. But there are no doubt challenges to that as well that you might feel as an athlete. And Sam, I thought I'd just ask you: have you found any of those? What are those main barriers, or you found barriers in the past or concerns or reservations about putting your voice out there about from environmental issues? Have there been any reservations that you've had to overcome in that space?
I think personally, I don't have a ton of reservations about speaking up. I think one issue I definitely ran into at first was just, I don't have a degree in sustainability or anything. Everything I know is just from reading and talking to people on my own. So feeling like I was educated enough, but I think at this point we all see what a crisis it is. So I've been able to pretty easily be like, hey, just like look outside. Things aren't that great sometimes. And I think another issue that a lot of athletes feel is that they feel they don't have a voice or power either with a following or within their organization. And I definitely think there's still some friction between athletes and definitely their NGBs. I don't think World Athletics as much anymore, but athletes definitely feel a little powerless, and that makes speaking up feel like you're shouting into the void on occasion. But I think that's something that's definitely being addressed by World Athletics, and I'd love to see it be addressed by more NGBs and see athletes kind of take it more front and center as a group to their NGBs and to their other athletes as well.
Brilliant. And Lou, obviously you work with a lot of athletes as well within Eco Athletes. Are they similar hurdles, similar barriers that you're hearing from your cohort? Are there additional ones to be aware of?
Well, the three that I've heard the most, and this goes back to when we started in 2020, and even before that, when I was interviewing athletes who for Green Sports Blog who were environmentally active, i.e. on things like plastic ocean waste removal campaigns and e-waste recycling drives and things like that, but were not, speaking out on climate specifically. And the three that come up the most are, it's too sciencey, and I don't feel comfortable speaking about a scientific topic, kind of like what Sam alluded to there for a second. And then two, it's too political, and I don't want to stick my neck out on something that's political. And three, and this is what I get the most, and Eliza was mentioning the flying, is that I fly so much for my sport that I'm going to be branded a hypocrite on social media for talking about climate because my personal carbon footprint is through the roof. And, without getting too into the weeds on it, our approach is that, first of all, the athletes can drive a lot in the climate action space when it comes to sports, because as you mentioned, Joe, they're the most influential humans on the planet. We don't have to be perfect. We have to, but where we can really help is to be solutions oriented. And can we come up with ideas, programs, initiatives to get more systemic change, i.e., advocate in the case of aviation for faster scaling up of low carbon and zero carbon aviation? Because that uses if we do that, and that will use the power of athletes to awaken the eyes and ears of their fans to the possibilities, and hopefully that translates to the eyes and ears of the CEOs of the companies that can make a difference on this. I also think that athletes can campaign for, for macro actions like healthier sponsors of sport, and and also trying to get fossil fuel companies out of sponsoring sport. Things of those natures, apart from what is being done at the venues, at the stadiums, which is also very important, can engage fans and can engage then corporate stakeholders. Because like I said before, we need systemic change. And the great thing about athletes, when you put them all together, is they reach a huge system of humans.
Yeah, and I think that uniting, like you say, the uniting of voices piece is going to amplify even further some of those individual followings, but bringing athletes together around this topic, probably, I know from personal experience as well, is finding peers that are also interested, strengthens your I suppose your confidence in speaking in some of these issues as well. If you're not as it's not as confident as Sam in the first place, or you've got a few more reservations, then sometimes that uniting piece can be really powerful. And I know, Bob, sorry, Lou, you're going to jump in on that.
No, that's one of the things that we try and do at Eco Athletes. One of the services we provide is to help our champions become more confident in communicating on this. And they don't, per Sam, they do not have to have a degree in sustainable communications or environmental engineering. They just have to look outside. So we try and help on that.
Yeah, that's great. And Bob, I guess you've, with the Champions for a Better World cohorts as well, and the inaugural cohorts and subsequent groups you're putting together, I guess you're trying to leverage that same sort of united peer group voice element through your work with that initiative. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. This kind of came out of some work we started doing around surveying athletes. When I began this role about 3 years ago, I was really curious to find some real data about how athletes felt about certain, not just environment, but social topics in general. That was just always really interesting to me. And I thought, well, maybe we have to find out where our athletes sit on this. So we just started doing a lot of surveys at pretty much any event, a lot of one-day meets, a lot of our World Championship events. And it became pretty clear where the concerns lie. In the first year we did these surveys, nearly 1,000. The first survey was in 2022. Nearly 1,000 athletes from around the world, from our U20 events to our Senior World Championships, took part. And over 77% said they were either extremely concerned or very concerned about climate change. So you mentioned your peers earlier. So to me, it's pretty obvious where your peers really lie on this. Whether you may not talk about it over dinner at a track meet, but you kind of get the idea where people's concerns really are. So that was really valuable to me through the surveys. And also, to another question we asked was, do you feel that World Athletics has a role to play? And more than 90% said yes. Athletes do expect us to do something in our power. They want to be associated with a sport, with an organization that is trying to do something in this space. So when we launched our sustainability strategy, a large part of that was to use our events as a platform to drive awareness, to drive behavioral change. It's not always easy to do that in the context of a sporting event, but we're trying. You mentioned earlier the Athletics for a Better World Standard. This is basically an evaluation system that we've developed. We've piloted over the past 2 years, and we're using that to now evaluate and measure how the sustainable delivery of an event. And that's now being built into the evaluation process, of our events. So it's not just a carrot approach. That's also going to be kind of a stick approach we've added to the whole process, which I think is a really big step. It's a massive undertaking. We have over 450 events that we're going to be evaluating. But it also, I think, shows our ambition in this space. And it's also something that we're working in. It's going to become a contractual obligation from our future World Championship hosts. They'll have to commit to a certain level of sustainable delivery as a guarantee of securing the bid. So again, that's something we really do want to add a stick to this carrot, because it's really, really important to kind of put our money where our mouth is, as it were.
Yeah, no, and the Athletics for a Better World Standard is formed a key part of, I guess, the framework that the Indoor Champs is using to help guide the social impact program as well in the upcoming event. And the World Indoor Champs are doing a load of effort, a lot of great initiatives that you'll hopefully hear about in the coming weeks as the event kicks off, as Eliza will know quite shortly, and the event organisers know quite shortly. But it has been a really guiding framework and a learning experience as well. Stuart, who's in the room, has been a real advocate for the Athletics for a Better World Standard and social impact and sustainability right from the get-go. And having those advocates, such as athletes, but also within the local organising committees and the delivery teams and the international federations, having those advocates in all aspects of sport is so valuable and really does push everyone in the accelerated direction. So there is lots of good work, and I suppose Athlete Voices really do also spearhead that as well. So it's great to have some champions for the better world on this call as well.
If I can just interject here before I forget, I just really do want to shout out to Stuart and the whole team for really taking this on board. This was important from the first conversations we had with him a year ago. This was really important to him, a really key component. And just to note, the LOC in Glasgow is under no contractual obligation to do this. You want to do this. You've hired consultants. You've hired social impact officers. You've had an all-day event here around social impact. This is really, really important, and you really are a really, really good example for us as we're kicking this off. So thank you again, everyone in the room who I can't see, but thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So I just want to circle back to I guess the solutions piece and the elements of trying to help people in this space. And Eliza, if I could just ask you, what do you find helpful in terms of whether that's from event organisers or people asking you to talk about issues in this space? What do you find most helpful in enabling you to do that? Because obviously, now I'm kind of on the other side of the elite world. There's lots of demand on athletes' time. Performance is always the paramount thing that nobody wants to interfere with, and rightly so. But obviously, athletes are more, as we've just had a previous session on mental health, and actually, the recognition that athletes are more than just that singular performance at the same time, and they have other interests and they have other strings to their bow. What do you find most helpful in helping, providing you the opportunities to engage in this topic?
Yeah, well, I think being provided with the tools to be able to speak out, and obviously that's something that Eco Athletes it's a big part of what they do as well. So being supported, feeling like you've got support to go out there and speak out about it, but then being provided the tools, whether that's education or platforms or whatever it is, to be able to feel comfortable speaking about it. Because if athletes aren't feeling comfortable about it, they're not going to do it. And as we talked about earlier, there are some challenges in terms of feeling like you might be called out for being a hypocrite or just not feeling like you know enough. Like there are some serious challenges for athletes wanting to speak out. So I think probably the number one helpful thing is to be provided with those resources and tools. But then also the next big thing is understanding an athlete's lifestyle and how they can engage. And I think Bob does a great job of this in terms of engaging athletes around meets and being very respectful of where their focus and their energy is going to be, and making sure that you don't kind of clash too much with the training schedule, with the competition schedule, so that athletes are just, going to be more likely to say yes because it's going to fit into what is going to work for them. Even things like, not early morning meetings, because as athletes we need our sleep, we need to sleep in, little things like that, just understanding how an athlete works. I think those are the most useful things for helping people feel comfortable to speak out.
Amazing. Sam, have you got anything to add to that from your perspective? Because I know that lots of people want to engage with you guys as athletes, but might be a little bit worried about not wanting to tread on your training toes and all those types of things. So anything else to add to that would be helpful for people out there wanting to engage with athletes?
There are a ton of athletes who really want to be involved in sustainability, and whether that's like making better personal choices, having sponsors from more sustainable brands, or just figuring out where to plug in terms of just speaking out, or something a little more serious and like organizationally related to some brand or within their athletics organization. And I think the great part about, whether it's Champions for a Better World or Eco Athletes or something like this, is it keeps the momentum going really well, I feel. Where in all these groups, you see people who are doing very impactful, incredible things, like Bob and Lou, just getting everybody together. And within those groups, you see athletes who are super, super deeply involved and passionate. And you realize that that's something that you can do also. And that if you can do it and another athlete can do it, you can inspire even another athlete or a friend or someone else to get involved. And I think those sort of ripples are really important.
And Lou, I'll just come to you on a similar topic. Obviously, I guess you've approached that sort of athlete engagement a bit like Bob from the other side of reaching out to athletes. And what have you found has worked well? Where have you found you've got the best buy-in or the best sort of reaction in terms of engaging athletes into this topic?
Great question. I think the thing that we've gotten the most traction with athletes is solutions oriented. I know I mentioned that in the last response I made, but where we talk with the athletes about ways that we can lead on solutions, whether it be on aviation fuel, more sustainable or low carbon aviation fuel, an initiative we'll be working on this year, or on the issue of apparel, especially athletic apparel, as it relates to all the swag that athletes get a lot of, and we as consumers are being told we always have to buy more stuff. Is there a way that we can work with athletes to work with the Adidas and the Nikes and the Under Armours of the world to have a more sustainable apparel ecosystem? That's something that athletes tend to get very keyed up about. Then what we're also finding success with is media. Media are wanting to talk with our athletes about whatever aspect of the environment or climate the athlete wants to talk about. We had last year in 2023, Eco Athletes generated on a very conservative basis 115 million positive media impressions because of the social media efforts of our athletes, but also the traditional media wanting to talk with our champions. And that means BBC and Sky Sports in the UK, ESPN here in the US, TSN in Canada, and in other countries. And the best example of that is from the world of athletics. One of our champions is an Olympic hurdler from Paraguay named Camila Pirelli. She has a nickname, La Pantera Guarani, the Guarani being the indigenous people of Paraguay. She's also a world-class heptathlete. Anyway, she advocates for the Guarani, and the Guarani have had many environmental deprivations imposed upon them. Anyway, the BBC named Cami as one of the 100 women of 2023. And that's not 100 women who are athletes or 100 women climate fighters. No, 100 women. Like, she was on the frame with, it was Cami, a couple other women, and Michelle Obama. And that is the power of sport and the power of athletes speaking up, and people are hearing it. And especially in the athletics community and just in the eco-athletes world, athletics is so well represented because athletes like Sam and Eliza and Cami are stepping up.
Yeah, and it is amazing. It is amazing to see. And like, to your point, Lou, is getting the recognition outside of just those environmental spheres as well, being able to transcend, I guess, some of those I guess groups that where you end up not speaking to the same people a lot, but but actually being able to transcend the message beyond those people that already care about this stuff and are already invested in this stuff, and these topics. So it is super powerful. And just on the point of, Lou, you mentioned around that, I guess, collaboration piece, whether that's with sponsors, with kit manufacturers, just to pick up on that collaboration piece, if I may, with you, Bob, in terms of working with other international federations, and how are you collaborating, working with, talking to your peers with other international federations, and collaborating and sharing knowledge, sharing best practice?
If I could just walk that back a little bit, just to touch briefly about sponsors. I do see a shift in how sponsors are approaching this. I think there's a lot of sponsors for a little while were trying to figure out how to approach sustainability, what it actually meant. But I think that's coming together a lot more clearly. And just one example, we have a memorandum of understanding with the World Federation Sporting Goods Industry. And when I gave a presentation about a year ago, and I started, a lot of it was just a lot of, okay, blah, 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 until I mentioned athletes, until I mentioned our importance with athletes, and then their ears just perked up. Everyone's ears in the room really perked up because they're very, very interested about that connection, how they connect athletes and what they're trying to do. So again, this is really an important connection of something that we're discussing here. Other collaborations, we are working with other sports through a number of research projects. And what's interesting to me is that, obviously we are more or less really facing the same problems. How we put on our events, or our events themselves, might be a little bit different, but we are really facing the same issues. And jumping all over the place, but also going back to Lou's point about the media. One thing we had a really good discussion about a few months ago was how we did notice an uptick in media interest around sort of environmental impacts on sport. But what we've began noticing for the first time last year was even like, mainstream media, whether it's, agencies or large newspapers, adding the words climate change into that equation, which was really a big step if you want to talk about, if you want to analyze media coverage. So that larger picture is becoming more accepted. So that's also really important part of this discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. Some useful insights there. I'm just going to go to some Q&A. We've got some questions through on the Menti, which is great. So I'll just circle to those as we cover the last few minutes. One for you, Eliza, if I may. It says, athletes are exceptional at turning obstacles into opportunities. Can you give us an example of how you've been able to do that with something that relates to sustainability?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. I think yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think The obstacle that I found initially was a fear of speaking up and what that might do to, I guess, my brand, to the followers that I have, and that's how I have sponsors, that's how I earn some money, you know, like all of those sorts of things. And so that felt and still feels like an obstacle for me to really put myself out there. This kind of fear that if I post a whole lot of content about environmental sustainability, no one's going to care because they're following me because I'm an athlete. And so that was quite an obstacle for me. But what I've found is that essentially a few years ago, I was like, right, well, what if this is my brand? What if this is who I am? This is what people follow me for. This is what sponsors want to engage with me for. And so I kind of flipped it around. I was like, right, I'm going to try and make this part of my brand. And I think that's kind of worked quite well because it's allowed me to keep exploring this without feeling like I'm deviating too much from the fact that I'm an athlete and that's my first job and that's what I'm here to do. But I've woven it into what I do as an athlete, and hopefully that will transcend my career in sport and will hopefully one day be my career as well. So I guess if that counts as an example of initially that felt quite intimidating to me, but you know, evolving that into being a part of who I am and what I have to offer, and hopefully have turned that into more of an opportunity than an obstacle.
Love that. That definitely counts in my book. I think it's a great answer. Thanks, Eliza. A different one for you, Sam, if I may. It says athletes travel. Obviously, travel is a big thing. We've kind of touched on it already. But athletes travel for competition, and sports fans travel to follow their favourite team, etc. What solutions are there to limit the carbon footprint? And I know that's probably a difficult one because in some cases, we've already mentioned flying is unavoidable, you know, to get over the Atlantic, for example, or whatever it may be. But are there ways you're trying to limit your carbon footprint in other ways as well, as think about your travel?
Yeah, for sure. I think travel, when it comes to sports and athletics in particular, is a really tricky issue. So I live in the US. Most of the big meets for me are going to be in Europe or overseas. So I am flying a lot. And I think that's something that most athletes do and can struggle with in terms of like how they feel personally about that. And I think it's something that speaks to broader system changes that are needed. You know, I'm not going to be able to take a sailboat to a meet or like just all of a sudden plug in sustainable aviation fuels when I have to go to a meet. But what I can do is travel a little bit less or try to stay overseas more and take a train in Europe because they have those, unlike in the US. But I think that having a large personal footprint as an athlete, for me, it just makes me want to be more impactful with the sustainability things that I do and the career that I have, because I know that right now, just where I am and where the world is, it's really tough to change my personal carbon footprint. And in the long run, that's not even something that matters a ton. What's really going to matter is how we change our organizations, and societal behavior and, you know, modes of transportation, not whether I, you know, travel overseas 2 or 3 times this year.
No, thanks. Thank you, Sam. I think, yeah, that's a good, and that sort of, I think that ethos of looking at what you can control, looking at your material impacts, but also looking at what you can control and really get your arms around some of that stuff that you can control is a kind of an approach that, yeah, as an individual, but also as organizations, events, are all kind of get your teeth stuck into, you know, what can you control, look at your big impact areas and go from there. So
I could just quickly add like one more thing onto that. I think another thing is, you know, you don't feel good about flying so often, and it would be great to see an opportunity to like pay into meaningful carbon offsets. I know a lot of them are kind of scams, but just having some sort of route where you can do that as an athlete, would be great. But I think that's a whole large project and side conversation that's probably a little bigger than right now.
We'll put that one on Bob's list.
We're working on something like that too, so it's doable.
If I could just add here too, there's there's a lot of talk about personal responsibility, and granted, that is important. We all do have a personal impact, but we in life, we can make decisions as consumers. We can also make decisions as citizens. So that's really, really important. The advocacy part about how do we change these systems, that's really as important as some of our personal decisions, because we can all in this room right now decide to stop flying. That's not going to really change the impact, kind of what Sam was alluding to earlier. So it really does take action as citizens. That's a whole another long discussion we can have, but that's really something to keep in mind on this, and not just feel like all the blame is on us as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. And just one final quick question before I throw it back to Stuart to wrap up this session. But just one final question on the Q&A is, Glasgow is an ambitious city with a net zero target of 2030 and recent host of COP26. How important is it to bring world athletics to cities that recognise the importance of sustainability? Bob, I'll throw that one to you if that's all right. Just to quickly give some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I said earlier, we're looking for hosts of our events who are really want to provide a good example, and I think Glasgow is really doing that. They really are covering all the bases of what we set up in our standard. Now, I didn't really discuss it in detail, but this does look at not only environmental impacts of our events, but also the social impacts. It looks at local economic benefits. All of these things are really important to an event. You can't have one without the other two. So again, hats off to Glasgow really for pushing this forward. You're going to give us a really good example moving forward. So thank you again. Perfect. Thank you, Bob. And I'll just give a quick thank you to all four of you for your contributions for that discussion. Yeah, some fascinating insights. So thank you for all your times. And on that note, I'll throw it to Stuart to close us off.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and to the panel, if they can still hear me. So, Bob, thank you very much for your kind words. Bob looks like he's talking on mine. That might be delayed on my screen, so ignore that. I just want to thank everyone. We've had a great day today. Tomorrow is the UN Day of Social Justice. And as you've heard throughout today, for those of you that have been here, is that we've spoken a lot about social impact across sustainability, mental health and well-being. And we've done that from a point of view of the industry versus sport, and actually a more collaborative element of, when we spoke about the event industry earlier, you're talking about grassroots, you're talking about permanent venues and facilities, and it was a really engaging conversation, and we've had that theme throughout the day across mental health and well-being also. So I want to thank everyone. It's been a really enjoyable and eye-opening conversation, and it's the perfect segue into what's going to be an incredible World Championships coming in just over a week's time in Glasgow. But we don't stop there. We have a lot going on around social impact this week, including a kids athletics program, a couple of hundred children from the East End of Glasgow taking part later this week, as well as community litter picking programs, and I could go on and on. But I just want to say thank you to everyone, a special thank you to Lucy for her expert coordination, and all our panelists and moderators. Thank you.